We are streaming.
You see how that is actually there?
Ooh, 7 viewers.
Ooh.
Look at that.
Not double digits yet then.
Oh, that's the most. This is the most we've ever had. So.
One on viral, by the way.
Oh yeah, one of them's me. I'm still counting.
So where's the microphone? Is it that?
There.
Oh, it's just that one.
Yeah, just that.
So it's just.
Yeah. I'll turn it around if it starts getting antsy. Oh, right. I'm starting out. We're still 5 minutes.
It'll be good.
See how happens in there.
I had your system's broken. That's all that. So no, you just broken it. You think firing 1,000 volts through it. I'll be back later.
I added a very tiny thing to my communications protocol and pretty much broke everything. There's been struggling to get it back on track.
No, the comms were good.
Annoying.
The comms blew up. How the comms were good. Yeah. Was it the actual thing I'm connected to? It says camera. I don't think it's my system. It's always someone's fault. Yeah, I suddenly got your system.
When I worked on the shop floor, I used to run in, oh, the machine's blown up, and I used to walk down and look at it, and then walk back and sit down again. And I come back, we've not done anything. I said, we told me it's blown up, and it hasn't. Look, there's no smoke. I said, you told me it's blown up, I want to see a crater.
Or at least some smoke.
Yeah, I want to see something. I said, well, it's obviously fixed itself, so I was employee of the month. No. On we go. Or we're still early.
3 minutes early.
I suppose so. We can do it quick for Bernie's sake, who we are, what we do. So I'm SWatts, company's STC. We're alliance members, and I've been writing LabVIEW for a long time. I'll talk about it quite a lot too.
My name is James Powell. I do LabVIEW consulting, sort of a one-person shop out of Oxford. Do a lot of work at RA and so on. I'm Andy Bradford. I'm from SWatts CS. I run a small software team in that organisation, mainly in the test department. I do a bit like you myself. Some of my team do the software code in Point Grey.
Engaging.
I'm Greg. I'm LabVIEW consultant as well. Just be myself. I'm currently contracted to SEDEX. Doing the test applications.
My name's Bernie. I'm Greg's wife. I know nothing about LabVIEW, but I'm going to talk through today a little bit about some changes in legislation and give some considerations around contracts as well for you today. What is your?
Hi, Matt Collett, Austin Consultants. I head up all the sales and the commercial side.
Hi, I'm Martin. I work for the University of Manchester, but I work at the research complex at Harwell on the Bow site for the University of Manchester. Developing control systems for research.
Hi, I'm Rowan. I work for Cobalt Light System. We've got 5 developers working with us.
So I'm Rebecca. I also work for Cobalt, and so I make devices that detect explosions in airports.
Hi, my name is Peter. I work for Anfax. We are Alliance member, and I've been with that for a few years.
I'm Sasha. I'm the Senior Systems Engineer at National Instruments for Automated Test. I've been using LabVIEW for a relatively long time.
I'm Charlotte. I'm one of the technical marketing engineers here at NI, and I primarily look after LabVIEW, so that's why I'm here. And I've not been using that for ages.
Lucy, I work for Tottenham Engines, doing control systems for Fusion. In the Guardian this week. So I've been doing LabVIEW a long time. I used to do lots of production LabVIEw.
I'm Adrian, I'm the other half of SSTC with Steve, and I've been using LabVIEW since version 5.
I'm Steve. I've been using LabVIEW since 3.1, I think. I work for. We use control monitoring systems in high temperature furnaces.
Cool.
Still surviving in the PV industry at the moment.
Still there, right? Still hanging in there.
Yeah.
Good work. Okay, so that's there is an introduce yourself page. So if you haven't, you should. Then we don't have to do that again. But as we'll go now. We've got lots of content on YouTube. I record this, and where possible, I chuck it out and mess around with it. It's really not for immediately afterwards, but it can be if you're interested. It's just for historic reasons, really. I quite like the idea of having some sort of history. So there's, if you go to the user group page, it's all there. The initial bits about reading it first, and that is about registration, which is still very confusing. I apologise. We'll work it out at some point in time. I attempted to make live streaming easy by clicking a link. Then I started the live event, saw it was back to front, stopped the live event, and it broke. And then I updated the link with a new live event, and my post went into moderations. Thank you, NI. So that's all gone horribly wrong. It would be really easy when I was sussed. So we have a packed agenda, as ever, but it's a bit different today, because we do have quite a lot of contractors, people who are interested in that sort of thing, and this is all about legal stuff. Okay, I didn't give it a better title. A typical half English title. Then Greg came up with questions about graphical user interface, and I kind of like going from basics rather than jumping in. So I said, well, rather than just, all us hello experts sitting and telling people what it should be done, perhaps we should just do some research and think about what should be done first. And what makes a good user interface, what makes a bad one, and what are the design aspects. So we've dug around and come in with some bits and bobs that are fairly useful. And I think it might make a nice basis for a group presentation at some point in the future if we have an opportunity, which may happen. But if it does happen, it'd be quite nice, because what I would like is to have more people presenting and have us. I think we do pretty well, but the more the merrier. I think we get everyone presenting. A bonus. So, and James hopefully is going to show us how he does his graph over. Yeah. James is speaking in Berlin, and so this will be a trial of his presentation, his program. And if we have any time, which I don't think we will, we'll carry on from code review and my oscilloscope thing. I think that's it. That's the agenda. So, you're up. Got to fend off.
I'm going to sit, if that's okay, rather than stand, because
Yeah.
my legs will shake. So
You don't have to sit yourself in front of the camera.
no, I don't intend to. Not that close up, anyway. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name's Bernie. I am Greg's wife, and I work for a company called Seracor. It's actually a group of recruitment businesses, but don't worry, I'm not a salesperson, although I am a lawyer, which is probably worse. My function is head of business support, and that means that I manage all of the internal legal and compliance requirements for the group. Well, you know what? It's nowhere near as exciting as what you people do. I realised that. It's just Greg decided that it's boring, but now I know. Now I know. You know, I'd be more interesting. But I have been doing in-house legal and compliance roles for more than 10 years, primarily in recruitment, but not exclusively. So there's a lot of work that I do around legislation and how those changes come to pass, what changes might be in the future, how to implement them within our business, but also for contractors and companies who utilize contractors. And in terms of the sort of the contractual side of things, I dread to think how many contract reviews I've done in my career, tens of thousands, I would imagine. So it's really just to give you the very commercial aspects of contracts. It is not a legal tutorial, because frankly, that is boring. So first part of the presentation is to talk about these upcoming changes in legislation. They will primarily affect contractors, but for any of you who work at companies who engage with contractors, it's kind of worth knowing as well. So let's move on. This could be user error. It doesn't seem to be moving. Oh. That wasn't me. Okay, so yes, absolutely. He's very glamorous. I'm lucky to have him. So the first thing that we've got is a change to dividend taxation. It comes into force on the 6th of April, which is the new tax year, and will affect any individuals who receive dividends as part of their income for any reason. It will primarily affect limited company contractors, those who operate through their own personal service companies, but it will actually affect anybody who receives dividends. So if you're a shareholder of another business and receive dividends from that, then you will be affected as well. The way that the system works at the moment is that any dividends that are payable out of a business, out of the profits of a business, are subject to a notional, which just means irredeemable, 10% tax credit. That either eliminates the need to pay any dividend tax or certainly reduces it by 10%, depending on where your income tax band threshold sits. The government has very kindly decided to abolish that 10% tax credit, which means that they have replaced it instead with a tax-free allowance, which instead of being a percentage is a flat rate of £5,000 a year. Now, obviously, for personal service companies, providing they're operating their company well, you can expect to see a lot more than £5,000 a year coming out of their business as dividends. So they've also changed the tax bandings for dividend tax, increasing them, no shock there. So actually, most experts estimate that you're going to experience an increase of between 6 and 7% on your tax bill, which ultimately comes down to a net reduction in take-home pay for those of you that actually operate a personal service company and divide your income between salary and dividends. Those who pay themselves high dividends are going to be the most affected, obviously. And the one thing that I can say, we're obviously in my sort of day job, we're going and talking to our clients about these changes in legislation, and it's really surprising for me, but most companies aren't that interested in increasing pay rates to offset these tax changes because of these poor personal service company contractors. for those of you that do operate a personal service company, that taxation will be worked out as part of the work that your accountant does, unless you're an accountant yourself, in which case I'm sure you already know about it.
Does that essentially eradicate the benefit of doing that? Because I don't think it's 5% difference from pay as you earn and
this isn't to do with pay as you earn, so it's just the amount of dividends that you receive. The amount of dividends that you pay yourself will be taxed at a higher rate. It's got nothing to do with operating pay as you earn.
yeah, but the tax difference, the tax benefit from running your own business and having pay as you earn, just doing it on that. Yeah, I mean, and you get the two choices. You can just get pay as you earn, can't you? And it becomes a cost to your business, so you pay less business tax.
Yeah.
Because you make less profit. Or you go this way, which you pay, you make high profits, which you get taxed on from the government, but pay yourself a bonus and pay slightly less tax. This looks to me as though, I mean, it's only a sort of 5% benefit anyway, or 6% benefit, as I looked at it. Certainly for our.
As I thought this, they're trying to eliminate the benefit of
yeah,
tax-wise.
I would say that pretty much eradicates it, so you might as well go the other way.
Yeah, and I mean, especially if you consider if your dividends are to such an extent that it puts you into the additional tax rate band, then you're already paying 32.5%, or you will be paying 32.5%. Well, actually, if you consider that your income tax will be at 40%, but then you've got national insurance at 12%. Oh yes, depending on whether it's class 1 or class 2 national insurance contributions. So most people still believe that operating a PSC is going to be the most tax efficient. Obviously, it's not my job to advise either way, but generally, I still think you'll find a greater take home as a PSC still, especially with some other changes that we've got coming in.
I've kind of I used to work in the US. Why is the British taxes so much harder to figure out?
Oh, well, you say that, but I've been working on a project within the US, and I found that quite difficult to navigate. To be fair.
Are you able to share these slides? Would you be able to share these?
Absolutely. Certainly, I can share the first half of the slides. Whether the second half is necessarily appropriate for a wider audience is something that we'll potentially have a conversation about.
If you email me the slides you want to share.
Yeah.
And tell me what you want to do with the video that isn't streaming.
Yeah.
Then just and then we'll put it on to our forum.
Of course.
You're in control of it.
Yeah, no problem. So the second change that we've got coming in terms of legislative changes relates to expenses tax relief. It takes effect on the same day. The new on home to work, travel, and subsistence expenses. So just to break that down a little bit, subsistence just means food and drink, and these changes only relate to home to work, travel, and subsistence expenses. Okay, so if you claim expenses for moving around particular sites during the day, this change doesn't affect that. You still get tax relief on that. So the system, the way that it works at the moment, is that umbrella contractors and personal service companies can claim tax relief on home to work, travel, and subsistence expenses. All that means, very simplistically, is that those expenses are not subject to income tax and national insurance deductions if you pay yourself national insurance. From the 6th of April, that tax relief will be abolished. Okay, it will be abolished for certain contractors. Those will be umbrella contractors because they're employed via what's called an employment intermediary, if they are subject to supervision, direction, or control, and for personal service companies if they operate within IR35. So the big thing really here, the level of people that I'm speaking to today, if you're a contractor, the chances are you're a PSC, the chances are you're a PSC outside IR35, in which case actually the impact on you will be nil because you are still able to operate that tax relief. If you are an umbrella contractor, then the decision as to whether you can maintain this tax relief or not all comes down to this question of supervision, direction, and control.
So IR35 determines whether or not you're really an employee rather than
Well, IR35 is HMRC's test for self-employment, and that dictates whether you can pay yourself via dividends, use the majority of your income via dividends, or whether you have to make what's called deemed employment payments. Doesn't make you an employee, but
Is
yes.
that like, my son's a carpenter, so he'd be under that really?
It depends. Do you know how he's paid?
Well, he's on the books, but he said it has to be classed as self-employed, so it wouldn't be that.
If he is, it may be that he's a sole trader set up,
Yeah.
so he would also be
Yeah.
subject to the supervision, direction and control requirements, yes. So the concept of SDC was first introduced in 2014 for a completely different piece of legislation, but also tax related. And what's interesting is that it's the first time that HMRC reversed the burden of proof. So previously, HMRC had to go out and investigate individuals or companies to ascertain whether they were paying the right tax or not. Well, they have about a 1 in 150 success rate. They are spectacularly unsuccessful in terms of investigations into taxation. So unfortunately, they obviously hired somebody with a bit of brains from the public sector who told them, well, don't do it that way. What you do is you reverse the burden of proof. So this SDC test means that HMRC will consider you subject to supervision, direction and control, and therefore the tax relief will be abolished unless or until you can prove otherwise. Okay, so it's an interesting dynamic and starts to show you the way that I believe HMRC is going in terms of reversal of the burden of proof. It is a very wide definition. I haven't included it here, but it's freely available on the internet. The definitions that HMRC uses to decide supervision, direction and control. Obviously, if the tax relief is abolished, that results in a decrease in take-home pay for contractors. And although it will obviously depend on particular circumstances, contractors who aren't paid particularly high pay rates, but have very high expenses, you can find that their decrease in take-home pay will be in excess of £100 a week. So this is not insignificant. This isn't just a Diet Coke and a Mars bar on the way to work in the morning. Okay, so it is significant. Just to give a little bit of an overview about the impact that these kinds of changes are going to have. Thank you, Carly.
Doesn't do that for me, right?
Obviously, contractors are going to want to see pay rate increases in order to offset the abolition of the tax relief. They're also likely to put pressure on agencies, if there is one in the chain, but certainly end clients as well, to help them pass a test of supervision, direction and control. And the important thing to mention is that although umbrella companies do hold primary liability for compliance or not, liability can transfer further up the chain. So for example, companies like Selex, who we know have a lot of contractors, you need to be really careful that your line managers aren't signing documents that state that a worker is not subject to supervision, direction and control, because actually if that information is provided fraudulently, you will become liable as the end client. Okay. We will potentially see reduced mobility, especially in remote geographical areas. If contractors do travel long distances and they're no longer able to claim the tax relief, that will obviously have an impact on where they're prepared to travel to. And we're also likely to see changes in payment vehicles. So we'll move away from the umbrella model down to a pay-as-you-earn or up to a personal service company. Each of those have risks, and it's certainly not advisable to change your payment vehicle simply for the purposes of avoiding changes to taxation. It does put you at risk of the targeted anti-avoidance rule, and that holds criminal penalties. So not to be done, really. Umbrella companies, as we said, they're the ones primarily in the frame for compliance. They will need to devise and undertake an SDC test that will give them an appropriate outcome and follow HMRC's rules as to what should happen. You will find umbrella companies, if they have their own accountancy arm, will probably be pushing their workers to a PSC solution, which isn't necessarily suitable and appropriate. You'll also find umbrella companies that have no intention of complying with all of these changes, especially because there have been a few over the last few years, and all they'll do is actually manufacture payment solutions that specifically seek to avoid it. They will be found by HMRC and they will be shut down, but they will make a lot of money in the meantime. So for any umbrella contractors, if you get marketing material through from an umbrella company and it looks too good to be true, I can guarantee it will be too good to be true. Unfortunately, there's no such thing as finding a way around it that is compliant. For end clients, so companies who engage with contractors, obviously there is the potential disruption if you have a lot of umbrella contractors and they are affected. You might be asked to make decisions as to pay rate increases, whether that should be always a no, always a yes, or case-by-case basis, and that can cause disruption in and of itself. Requests to sign off or sign bits of paper to state whether SDC applies or not. This comes back to the pressure that the contractor might bring to bear on end clients. It's really important to try to resist that pressure. For companies who engage with contractors directly, where there is not an agency in the chain, if you don't operate a preferred supplier list for umbrella companies, now may be the time that you want to start thinking about doing that. Because actually we've already seen 3 fairly large umbrella companies go bust over the last 2 months because they simply can't keep up with the changes. They're not financially solvent enough to manage what these changes actually mean. It means that contractors go unpaid. And again, that causes significant disruption. So taking the time to do some due diligence on a small number of umbrella companies and then enforcing a preferred supplier list is actually, a good way to go if you don't have an agency in the chain. Because if you have an agency in the chain, you just put the responsibility on them. So just a little bit about kind of what's sort of coming down the line. Well, certainly, I think over the last few years, we've started to move very much towards what I consider a binary, not binary, clever, in this room as well, binary model, of contracting. So at the moment, we have a kind of a number of hybrid solutions that we can utilize and is quite acceptable. But actually, I think going forward, the government is really pushing people to a full pay-as-you-earn solution with no tax efficiencies, but all of the employment benefits. Or you're looking at, really specialist skills, not doing business as usual work, standing on the same line as permanent employees. They're brought in specifically for projects and working generally on a kind of a fixed price kind of basis. That is the same model at the European Union generally, also adheres to. It's a very, very separate model. You're either fully employed or you're completely self-employed. And we don't have any of those hybrid models really in any of the other EU countries. And that is the way the government is showing its intention to go. The EU referendum takes place this year, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with the contracting world as a result of that referendum. You could argue that if Britain leaves the EU, will that take the government away from this push towards that binary model? Well, probably not, because the Chancellor is couching it in terms that means that he can get more income tax, and actually he's not going to stop that probably. So I don't necessarily think that will have an impact. But certainly, if the way that economic migrants are engaged in this country and their restrictions on highly skilled economic migrants from the EU, because Britain decides to leave the EU, well, then does that then leave the government in a place where it's enforcing a very inflexible method of contracting, and actually people won't do it? So then do you actually have the skills that you need, using vehicles that are available in order to be able to facilitate that? So it's something to be aware of. On the 16th of March, the Chancellor released his budget statement and did make clear that the way that the public sector can utilise personal service companies from 2017 onwards is going to change really drastically. The primary driver are people like Jimmy Carr and Jonathan Ross, but actually this will affect any worker utilising their personal service company in any public sector entity. So that will include central government departments, local governments, Transport for London, any publicly owned entities. And ultimately what it's going to, the way that the legislation will change, and although we don't have full details because obviously this only came out a few days ago, but what we do believe is that end companies, end clients or agencies will make the determination of IR35. It will not be in the contractor's ability to decide his or her self-employment status. The end client decides. If the end client decides that they are within IR35, the end client must make pay-as-you-earn deductions, tax and NI deductions themselves, and actually report those deductions through real-time information reporting. That is a huge departure from the system that we have now. And how they're going to enforce it is going to be interesting. Obviously, it's something that I'll be keeping a close eye on, because that's going to certainly affect my job as well as everybody's here. The government has also promised a complete review of IR35 across all types of working, and I do think that it will probably go the same way. Contractors will no longer be allowed to determine their own self-employment status. End clients will do that, and end clients will be responsible for actually making the relevant deductions as well. So it's going to get very, very messy and very sticky. But we'll find a way through, because we always do. So, any questions about the changes in legislation? Excellent. So, moving on. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about contracts. Obviously, you know, my background is in law, and my roles are always legal roles, but that is not what I'm going to be talking to you about today. It's not about the legal side of things. It's very much the commercial side of things from a business perspective. I hope it's not too legal. I hope it's not too low level, and I also hope it's not too complicated. So I'll do my best, but do shout out if anything isn't clear. Okay. I must have accidentally put some, you know, whatever the word is, things on it to make it go funny. There you go. There's my technical expertise. So, fundamentals of any contract offer. I will offer you this kettle for the price of £30. Acceptance, I accept this kettle for £30. Consideration is the offer of the kettle and the £30. And one thing I would say now is that consideration must be mutual. You can't have a contract whereby one party does everything and the other party just sits back and goes, thanks very much. And it has to be level as well. You can't have one party saying, well, I'll give you £1 for that £30 kettle, because actually what the consideration that you're bringing to the table is insufficient for what you're getting in return. And obviously intention to create legal relations. Contracts don't have to be written down. However, please don't agree any piece of work at any level without a written contract. It's generally never going to be in your favour. I think every single business should have a standard set of terms, and that doesn't matter what the size of your business is. There are a number of reasons for that. One is the more you can understand what a contract means in practice, the easier it will be for you to negotiate when you are unable to use your standard terms. Knowing what to look out for and what's important to you, because it's clearly put out in your standard terms, gives you a comparison point for when you get terms that aren't yours, okay? The other thing is you can write a set of standard terms that match your insurance levels, and you can actually get that signed off by your insurer so that you're really comfortable that any piece of work that you do is covered by insurance, providing it's on those standard terms, okay? So it doesn't matter the size of the company, everyone should have a set of standard terms. It's one of the things that I think frustrates me the most about contracts is the lack of reasonableness. I mean, ultimately, if you are a customer and you are engaging a supplier to do a piece of work, then having ridiculously onerous terms that sit solely in your favour actually don't necessarily work that much in your favour. Basically, because a supplier whose work is sold is going to turn around and realise that it's a really unfair contract and will negotiate on every single point. So you're starting from a very combative point of view from day one, because actually then they'll really push on anything. If you have a set of terms that is actually quite reasonable and genuinely considers both sides and what you want to get out of it, well, then the chances are that that supplier might think, well, I don't particularly like clause 2.7 or 9.4, but actually, you know what, the terms are so reasonably worded, I'll take that risk. So it does work in your favour to be reasonable. The other thing is, always match your terms to the complexity of the arrangement. Having a 300-page contract for a small piece of work on a time and materials basis is really not going to work for you. It is not fit for purpose, and you can end up having to find information to put in a bunch of schedules just because the schedules are there and they're named and you've kind of got to put something in, which might trip you all up further on down the line and takes away from the main intention of the parties, which is just to get a piece of work done. When you're designing your own standard set of terms, think about the most awkward person you can, whether that's a customer or supplier. Think about every single thing that might go wrong and think about what you would do in those circumstances. And the thing about that is nobody looks at a contract when everything's going well. It's only when things start to turn sour that people start referring to the contract. So actually the contract should be heavily in favor of what happens when things don't go right, not what happens when everything's hunky-dory. A very quick point to note when we're talking about the supply of people, and specifically for contractors, agency contracts are not all the same. Please don't make that mistake. A lot of agencies will flow down responsibilities from their main customer or client contract down to contractors. Please read them, because you might find yourself signing up to something that is far greater risk than you're actually prepared to take. Well, what happens if both parties send terms? So you, as a supplier, send out a proposal with a standard set of terms alongside it, and the customer comes back saying, yeah, absolutely happy to accept that proposal. Here's a purchase order. And the purchase order contains a link to their set of terms. Well, then which one applies if the both of you then just carry on and start the engagement? Well, actually, it is generally the last shot fired wins. So therefore, if the customer returns a set of terms to you or gives you a purchase order and it contains a link anywhere in that email or the purchase order, it's generally going to be their terms that govern the arrangement. But really, you don't want to be relying on sort of crafty underhand, I sent mine and then they sent theirs and then I sent mine again, because actually what you should be doing is sitting down and saying to people, let's get it out there on the table exactly how this is going to work and get terms actually signed. That's always the best basis, because you know where you stand. I'm not going to go through all of these before everyone gets really scared. It's only going to be the areas in green that I'll talk about in a bit more detail. However, for me, any contract, regardless of the complexity of the arrangement, should cover all of these areas. They're the kind of fundamentals. There's lots of other ones that end up slipping in, but they're the real important ones that I think you should all be looking to cover. But as I said, I'm not going to talk about all of them. Damn it. Sorry. So the first thing to talk about is type and scope of services. If you are going to provide a service to somebody, don't accept a contract for goods. They're not fit for purpose. They're not the way that actually you're going to be working with them, and what you're agreeing to should follow what it is you're actually going to do. The other thing is that if you've got a contract for the supply of goods, for example, the toaster, then actually it's reasonable for you to expect that that toaster would have a warranty for a period of a year. Well, you're not going to warranty a piece of code for a year, especially if the client decides to make changes to it after you've gone out and left, and then actually they rely on that warranty. So, you know, make sure it's fit for purpose. In terms of the scope of services, it's really important to be absolutely clear about what you're going to supply to that customer. You need to be as precise as possible. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be shoehorned into an agreement. It doesn't need to be all legally worded with lots of kind of terminology that you don't really understand. Write it out on a separate piece of paper. Make sure that it's absolutely clear. Both sides understand what it means, and then just attach it as a schedule to the contract and say the services will be delivered in accordance with Schedule 1, for example. Okay, so you don't need to, you know, you don't need to over-egg it from the legal perspective. One thing that I would say, don't accept things like as agreed between the parties. The whole point is that's what you should be agreeing when you're agreeing the contract, is what you're going to be delivering. The other thing is, if you agree to some terms within the main contract that you're actually a little bit uncomfortable with, and you're having to negotiate a little bit further than you would like, and then actually you can't then negotiate the services to an area that you feel is reasonable, you end up with a contract that is past your risk tolerance level. You don't necessarily want to do that, so get it all done up front. Don't accept or suggest wording that is things like services required for the completion of a project. It's way too vague, and it can put responsibilities on suppliers to be responsible for a much larger project when actually you were just a small but important cog in a much larger project. What is out of scope is just as important as what is in scope. So in terms of, this is what I will deliver for this price. If I have to do this, it will actually be extra. And what are you basing that extra on? For example, a rate card. But also what is out of scope. And don't just agree what is out of scope and leave it out. Write in that it's out of scope. Because again, then there's no expectations and there's no miscommunication as to actually what is and isn't out in scope. Deliverables. If you agree to deliverables as part of your contract, then make sure that the sign-off process is really simple. I can't tell you how many contracts end up, you know, where both parties are in intractable positions because actually just the sign-off process was so onerous and opaque that actually nobody could get anything signed off, so they didn't get paid, and it all started to turn the relationship sour. The other thing is, if you're agreeing to deliverables, make sure the deliverables match what it is that you're saying that you will deliver. So if you're working on a time and materials basis, well, then what you will deliver is 4 days worth of work. If you're saying I'll give you a fully operating toaster, well, then you've then got the requirement to deliver on a time and deliverables basis and give them a toaster at the end of it. So don't put, you know, always make sure that the deliverables match. I would always suggest keeping something back until after you've received payment. Even if it's something as simple as documentation. It's just that extra little push in the direction of the customer to ensure that they're actually going to pay you. Sorry? Do they not? Well, try to keep something back. Service levels, well, this is where you agree certain specified levels of performance, and that may be around time, it may be around specific areas. Again, it's up to you whether you include them or not. But again, tie it into the scope. Don't tell them that part of a service level is that you will respond to any request within 2 days if actually time isn't the critical factor on this project, because then you end up being responsible for something that actually wasn't a major consideration to that customer or for that customer to that supplier. If you agree to service credits, that is essentially where if you miss a service level that is agreed, you have to repay the customer for whatever it is that you have missed. That's absolutely fine. And again, it's a good remedy to have because actually it means that parties can continue their arrangements under that contract while having a way in which to make people sort of pay back for things that haven't been done properly. The one thing that I would say is be really careful that you don't agree to service credits under one clause, remedying defects at your own cost under another, and liquidated damages somewhere else down the line as well. And you will find customers will do that. So they actually make you liable in 3 ways for the same thing that you didn't do quite right. Okay, so when you're reading contracts, read each individual clause, but always take a step back and think, right, if it all goes to hell in a handbasket, what am I actually liable for? And if there's more than one remedy for the same mistake, you need to make sure that's negotiated out. Okay. Billing and payment. Obviously, you need to decide what it is that you're going to be paid on, whether that's time and materials or fixed price work, and that, you know, can be, you know, fairly obvious and fairly easy. But actually, you'd be amazed at the number of people that forget to do that. It's surprising. The other thing to bear in mind is an invoice process. So actually, how you invoice and when is important. The timing and the format, and this is again, this is not illegal, it's a very commercial perspective. I can't tell you the number of customers that will say, yeah, absolutely, we'll agree 30-day payment terms. Fantastic, that's great. What you neglected to read was that actually you're only entitled to invoice 60 days after you finish that particular deliverable, which means actually they're getting 90-day payment terms out of you. So making sure that you read when you can invoice is just as important as how soon you get paid once you do. The other thing is formatting requirements. You know, if you're told that your customer has to have an invoice that has a pink smiley face in the top right-hand corner and a blue sad face in the bottom left-hand corner, and you forget, they can reject that invoice on format, not substance. So they're not questioning that you've done the work and that you're entitled to that amount. What they're saying is you've not given me an invoice in a format that I can accept, and therefore we don't have to pay you. It is another way to push out how quickly they need to pay their suppliers. So be really mindful of it. The other thing that I would say from the customer point of view, if you're a customer and you use these kind of techniques, well, one, nobody in this room will actually accept them anymore, so sorry about that. But two, don't forget that especially your small suppliers, they do talk, especially if it's quite an incestuous industry. And actually suppliers will start to pick up on this, especially if those issues come into play. And when you have a really critical project and you need someone, that supplier may refuse to do business with you. So, you know, it works on both sides.
Sometimes with someone who used to work for a division of General Electric, and their payment terms are terrible, they're like, it's 90 days. But it just leads to an actual GE employee saying, you know, just put your rates up to 10% to pay that extra inconvenience. It's like,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, for us, 90 days is we just refuse to work. Normally, they have different pay rates. So GE, for example, have a contractor rate, which they pay in 14 days, and they fixed price supplier. This is where this goes back to that. They have a fixed price supplier rate, which is 90 days.
Yeah.
So you get Goodrich are the same, UTC, you have to go to them and go, yeah, well, there's only two of us, you know, we need to get on this one. And then you get around the system.
But the thing is if it's 90 days end of month, well, then you're waiting even that little bit longer. So again, it's all about it's about the detail, devil's in the detail.
And you can say it's 10, but it costs you 10% of the loan. It's the cash because they don't. If it's 90 days, at the end of 90 days, they can reject it.
Yes.
And then you've got the whole process of resubmitting.
Yeah, and the onus is on you to put it right and resubmit it, and that may take you 10 days. Well, then that's 100 days.
We're strictly 30 on the understanding that
yeah.
A lot of them will negotiate, I think, from my experience, especially in engineering. You start off, those terms often they come from a junior buyer first, who has this level of sign-off. If you push back again, it goes up a level and up a level.
Well, we're in an intellectual business where they need our help.
Exactly.
So Danaher, for example, do their 90 days thing. They say, oh yes, you have to commit to reducing your payment and we'll pay you on 90 days. And I just send that back saying, well, I'm not going to do business with you.
Yeah.
Oh, come on, we will have to get rid of it. And you know, that, you just have to stand firm because there's always a wage man.
Software is not a commodity. If you wrote it, you are in the best position to fix whatever problems are.
Yeah.
Generally, if things go right, they want you back.
Yeah, absolutely.
They want you that relationship.
I've seen with some larger companies as well, that they're obligated, their procurement process is such that they're obligated to offer you better terms if you offer them a corresponding discount, no matter what that discount is, especially in the US. So you can invoice them, they say 90-day terms, you offer them 1% discount for payment within 15 days. I've generally found that they have processes internally where they then have to accept that and they'll give you
paid you, and actually if they've paid you quicker than the maximum number of payment days, you're obligated to reduce. We've seen that.
Just out of interest, out of us that are contractors or have our own small businesses, hands up whose legal and contractual type stuff is poor to embarrassing. I'll be really.
I don't think we're poor. I think you're doing an injustice. A lot of those points we do.
Scope and stuff.
We don't cover all of them.
We have got standard terms, but yeah, I think there's lots of disparate pieces of paper with us that cover a lot of this.
Oh yeah, that's never messy.
Can I take it that the people that didn't put their hand up are the employed ones?
That was at the back. He might have a heavy hand.
No, but when I cover a lot. Obviously, this is the world I live in, but with that being, I'm not saying not right, but we used to that thing about POs coming in and small print at the bottom somewhere going linked to our T's and C's override anything said previously. is always there. And then you try and hunt for them. You got to find them.
Yeah, and the link's broken, and you're like,
Yeah.
well, that's helpful. Thank you very much. Yeah, they've just upgraded their website and forgotten that bit.
The last shot fired cannot be the order acknowledgement. You can't give an order acknowledgement, which is the last piece of paper in the process that we do. Oh, thank you, we accept your terms. You can't then say, oh, these are our terms. So actually, the purchase order is always going to be the last shot fired. And their terms.
But if they've got, you said the last shot fight, if they've got legal wording in those terms saying these supersede any terms sent by any supplier, I assume it doesn't matter what order they're set.
If your terms, for example, state that these supersede anything sent by anybody else, if you're not the last shot fired, doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah, that won't, because they'll always say that. The two will then say that, so then you go back to which one takes precedence, and it's the last shot fired. But if yours state that it will supersede and the other people's don't, it doesn't matter.
One thing, I went for the British Aerospace terms. Oh, bless them. They take more care of me than they do. And so I'm just a shout out for British Aerospace. Their terms are lovely.
Yeah, it's always nice to get a set of terms that you think, oh, you're a really reasonable company. I thank you a lot. Yeah, and that gives you a good feeling and actually motivates you to work with them. And you don't then want to be pernickety about these small areas where actually that's their biggest gains. So they've been really reasonable on the things that they don't care about and a bit more sneaky on the things that they do care about, but you're willing to accept it because you're so delighted that they've given you a piece of paper you can actually read and agree to. So,
has anyone wound up in court?
Has anybody what, sorry?
Wound up in court?
No.
That's where contract matters, right?
Termination is the thing for us, and it's happened very, very few times. But that's where I worry most.
We got fairly close last year. We got legal advice, but we didn't actually go as far as court.
Yeah.
Didn't have to go that far because they paid up eventually, but it was going that way.
People make a lot of money from it. We're in arbitration at the moment.
Oh yeah, I've got that in there. Not always the cheapest option, dispute resolution.
No, not really in this one.
Yes.
Might keep us afloat.
I only work time and materials, and I have to make sure that the amount they owe me is below a certain level that I can, worst case, accept as being caught.
And before you do an invoice.
The amount of money the work I've done, that they would theoretically owe me, I gotta make sure that's not above a certain level where I would consider that too big a loss.
I mean, back in the early days, our companies would use that as a stick to people. They'd say, oh yes, you owe, we owe you and aren't paying you this 25 grand, which, you need for your starving family because we haven't paid you in 6 months. Just do this one more job. And constantly, and they operate like this all the time. You constantly.
The standard chaos theory will say something will go wrong with one of your versions, and you'll need me within the next 2 months.
Got to the point where
my rates will double.
In fact, I'll give the FSB a little plug because we've used their legal services a few times recently. And they're always out at the end of the phone. They're actually a small business. So if you use them for nothing else, it's worth joining up them.
Yeah, is that the Federation of Small Business?
Yeah, they've been good on that. It's not what is it, but it's about 100 quid.
So, payment terms is obviously when you expect to get paid, how long it's going to take them to pay you. Making sure that you put a provision in there for what happens in the event of late payment is really important. You are not entitled to charge interest unless the contract states that you are entitled to charge interest. So, except for in certain construction contracts. So that's something to really bear in mind. The other thing is that if non-payment goes on for a certain amount of period, should you be entitled to suspend services? Again, it's not a right that is available to you without it being contractually, enforced. So if you want to say, if you don't pay me for a month, then I get to charge interest. If you don't pay me for 2 months, actually, then I can suspend services. Complete non-payment will always be what's considered a material breach, and you're always entitled to terminate the contract on the basis of material breach because what the customer is paying you is actually their consideration. So they're not providing that consideration by paying you, therefore they're in breach of the contract. Set off and withholding, 2 sneaky little things that I just want to bring your attention to. if you agree service levels and service credits with a customer, that's all well and good, but then you need to decide what will happen if a service credit is due. Generally, what you'll agree is that the customer will send you an invoice and you will pay it, probably on the same payment terms that you get paid by your customer. If the customer has included the right to set off in one of their clauses, it means that actually what they can do is then just take the money that you need to pay them on that service credit out of the next invoice they pay you. They can actually set off anything that is due to them against what they pay for you. So they get their refund immediately, you don't get it at the time that you want it. Okay, so don't accept the right to set off if you can avoid it. Withholding, lots of companies will say that they are entitled to withhold invoices in the event of a dispute. If you can't get it negotiated out, at least make sure that what you are allowed to do is get payment for any undisputed amounts, and only the disputed amount can be withheld until whatever it is that is disputed is sorted out, okay? Because you will find that on big pieces of work, they'll dispute one tiny area and withhold the entire invoice, and obviously that doesn't work very well for your cash flow as a business. Termination and consequences. Well, termination for convenience is basically, you're not in breach, I'm not in breach, this isn't working for us, let's terminate. That's absolutely fine, nothing wrong with that, but try to make sure it's mutual. You know, you don't want the customer going, well, I'm bored of you, I don't, you know, or the project's not around anymore, we don't want you, but actually you don't have the right to step away. If the project that you're working on is that critical, neither should have the right to terminate for convenience. If it's not that critical, you both should. Termination due to breach. Obviously, anybody has the right to terminate if a contract has been breached, but an area to note, you can't terminate a contract if it is a minor breach, only if it is a major breach. And a major breach is something that has to go to the fundamental essence of the contract. So just be wary that, you know, you don't start thinking, well, you know, there's a few areas that they've pulled up on that I don't really like, and they've not done what they should, so I'm terminating the agreement. You may not actually have the right to do that.
How does the later payment fit into the breach? So
Well,
if your terms are 30 days and they pay 60, now to me, that is a major breach of contract.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, it does then depend on what other provisions you've put in, I think. And it would depend on the circumstances under which they're not paying. If they're just not paying, then that's non-payment.
I mean, it's fair dues if they go back and go, there's a problem, we're not going to pay because of this. That's fair dues. But if it's just silence and just non-payment and we're chasing that and we're not getting anywhere,
yeah,
then that
they're not providing their obligations under the contract, therefore you have a right to terminate. And the thing is that there's no set boundaries as to how long another party has to mess up before you can terminate, but obviously it needs to be reasonable. Step-in rights. Always avoid step-in rights. This is where if you as a supplier are not performing your obligations under the agreement, the customer can step in and perform those obligations on your behalf, or engage another supplier to step in and perform those obligations on your behalf. You are liable for any costs or losses incurred as part of those step-in rights. So they can get the most expensive business to come in, offer to pay them quadruple what they're paying you in order to get it done, and you have to pay the bill. So don't allow step-in rights under a contract.
Would it be called that?
It will almost always be called step-in, and actually generally companies who try to slip in a step-in clause somewhere else that isn't necessarily unambiguous might have it thrown out, because it is a very onerous obligation, so it should be fairly clear. Now, that's not to say that companies won't try and slip it in somewhere and take the risk that the court will or won't find it enforceable, but it will always generally be referred to as step-in. A final point to note, dispute resolution. If things are going wrong and you want to resolve the dispute outside of the courts, just bear in mind, dispute resolution like mediation, not always the cheapest option, because actually you both need to engage lawyers, you need to pay for the venue, you need to pay for the mediator or mediators, and you need to pay the company organising the mediation as well. Whereas actually, if you go to court, you just pay your lawyer's costs and the court costs. actually it might end up cheaper. The other thing is, if you don't get what you want out of mediation, you have to go to court anyway. So it's just something to bear in mind, and sort of weigh up the options. So we are on the home stretch. Liability for breach. Well, what happens if one party doesn't perform its obligations under a contract? Well, the most available remedy is damages, and it is a remedy that is available to you as of right. If a party has not performed their obligations, then you are entitled to damages. That is, whatever losses you have incurred as a result of that non-performance or breach of contract. Okay. There are some specifications around damages. You are under a duty, the non-breaching party is under a duty to minimise or mitigate those losses. So if, for example, you not performing your services as a supplier might put them in breach of an agreement with their end client that has all kinds of financial penalties, well, if they can bring in another supplier to do that work, well, then they should be doing that. And the breaching party may be responsible for the work done by the supplier, but they won't be responsible for the financial penalties of you breaching your contract with the end client. There are time limitations, so you can only claim damages up to a certain amount of time, and that's very specific as to what damages you're claiming, but it needs to be timely. You can't say 5 years afterwards, well, actually, I don't think you did your job very well, and sue for damages. You won't get it. The other thing is that the losses that you incur, and therefore the damages that you claim for, have to flow from the breach. Okay. However, how closely it needs to cause how closely the breach needs to cause the loss can be really, really wide, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I've completely forgotten what I was saying. You can specify remedies for minor breaches where you're not entitled to terminate, and I would encourage you to do so you know where you stand. Things like service credits or remediating at no cost, for example. Liquidated damages, this is a kind of term that people find really scary, and they're like, oh my God, never agreed to liquidated damages. Actually, it's quite a good clause to have sometimes. What it essentially means is that the parties have agreed what those damages would be in the event of a breach. So instead of going to court and taking your chances that the customer might come up with all these kind of things that you're then liable to pay back, all these losses that you were completely unaware of, actually what they're doing is putting into the contract, actually we pre-estimate that any losses of a certain type of breach will come to this amount, and then you can say, oh, actually that sits within my insurance cover, so actually I'd rather do that than take my risks in court and have it actually be even more. The one thing that I would say is liquidated damages do have to be a genuine pre-estimate of loss. So if a customer comes to you and says, well, you know, liquidated damages 45 million, you know, that's a genuine pre-estimate of loss, and the chances are it's not, and depending on the size of the contract, of course. Then that is considered what's called a penalty clause, which is basically just scaring the supplier into making sure they perform their obligations. It's unenforceable, okay? Limitations and exclusions of liability. Well, obviously, so you become liable if you breach, and your customer becomes liable if they breach, or vice versa. And actually excluding or limiting your liability is an important thing to consider when you're in contractual negotiations. It's perfectly all right to limit your liability or exclude it under certain circumstances, so that you're all clear about who's bearing what risk under the contract. And courts will generally, you know, be quite sympathetic and mindful towards, you know, what you're excluding and limiting. Limitations will be a limit on the amount or type of loss, generally an amount. So you limit your liability, for example, to £1 million. Exclusions will simply state what you're not liable for at all. You cannot exclude or limit liability for death or personal injury caused by negligence. It's just not allowed, so don't even bother trying. The only thing that I would say is that limitations and exclusions have to be fully incorporated. They can't just be tacked on the end. They need to really form part of the contract, and it needs to be shown that you've negotiated it because it sits well with other clauses that you've agreed to. It can't be ambiguous. Don't try and use an external law firm who will word it in such a way that no person in their right mind would read it as a limitation or exclusion of liability, because they'll throw it out. Be obvious, be clear about it, because the whole point is it's supposed to give you clarity not make it more difficult and more opaque for you to understand. It needs to be reasonable, and any limitation or exclusion of liability that a court might interpret as you limiting the liability that's available to a party when you don't perform your obligation will also be thrown out. Obviously, the whole point is that there has to be remedies available to the party that doesn't breach. So you can't limit or exclude your liability to the extent that actually you cannot perform your side and go, oh, well, I excluded all of my liability. So, you know, there's no recourse to you. Always, 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 always exclude liability for indirect, special or consequential loss. These are the kind of the really far down the line causations for damages that can really, really trip you up. They are things like loss of profit, loss of revenue, loss of goodwill, loss of future profit, would you believe, loss of supplier or customer. These are tenuous but have been held in court to be enforceable, therefore always exclude it. And don't just leave it out if it's not in there, put it in that it is excluded, okay? That's just going to cause you all kinds of problems. Then we start to talk about liabilities for service standards or output standards. Basically, you have three areas, or well, three kind of steps as to what your obligations are. Variable obligations are the easiest, as in the lowest standard, the lowest bar that you need to pass in which for that service to be considered acceptable. It's things like standard expected of a similarly skilled person, reasonable endeavours, and then the highest of the variable obligations is best endeavours.
How do they prove that?
Well, you see, for lawyers, we know exactly what reasonable endeavours means and best endeavours, but there's 150 years worth of case law that got them to that point, which is quite difficult to explain. But it's not a million miles away from what you would, as a normal person who isn't a lawyer, would expect that to be. That's the kind of the best I can do, really.
Would be the kind of thing where they get an expert witness and sort of say, do you think he's done a good job?
No, well, potentially they might get a similarly skilled person to come in and say, actually, would you consider that best endeavours? But it would have to be something really specific, and I guess what you guys do is quite specific. So yes, potentially they could. However, if what you're doing in terms of the communication under which you are showing that you are using your reasonable or best endeavours as part of your communications, that would be evidence that you're saying, I've tried this 3 times and it's not working, so I've pulled that out and stuck that bit in, so, you know, how does that look? And then going, no, it's still not working. Okay, well then I'll come in and, you know, so it's about your conduct as much as it is a sort of an absolute de minimis standard. Absolute obligations are warranties or guarantees, and remediation at no cost. Obviously, if you've agreed that, then that's what you have to do. So that's an absolute warranty, an absolute obligation. Guarantees are a guarantee that you will perform to a certain standard. A warranty is a scary word that actually isn't as onerous an obligation as you would expect. So if you see that in a contract, don't panic. It is a promise that something will be of a certain standard and that you will repair or replace if not. However, breach of a warranty is not sufficient for the customer to terminate the contract. It is not a material breach, so that is something to bear in mind. It's not as scary as you think. And then we come on to indemnities. This is the last slide, and if you take one thing from this, it is please don't agree to indemnities wherever possible. They are the most onerous obligation on you, because what it is that you agree to indemnify the other party if a specified event occurs. If that specified event occurs, you have to pay for it. You have to pay for any losses that come out of that specified event. You are not allowed to defend that claim. You have no right to defend it, because all you've said is, if that event occurs, I will pay you for it. So you can't defend that claim. It doesn't matter if it's not your fault. So fault is actually completely irrelevant under an indemnity. The indemnified party does not need to go to court. They just send you the bill. If you don't pay it, that's when they'll take you to court. But they don't need to go to court to enforce it. They have no duty to mitigate or minimise any losses coming out of the indemnifying event. It can make you liable to a number of parties if you agree to an indemnification clause that indemnifies your customer and their end customer. That's two people who can send you a bill. It's perfectly legal. You have to pay it. Insurance companies generally won't cover indemnities because they're so onerous and it's so difficult to know just how bad the outcome will be. Don't accept them wherever possible. If you have to, always try to indemnify against an event that you have complete control over, obviously, you know, and then make sure it doesn't happen. And obviously, if you have to, then make sure that you negotiate a level of liability, a maximum level of liability, and that it includes indemnity. So then at least you know what the maximum amount is that you'll be liable for. From a customer point of view, breach of an indemnity and the resulting losses from it are one of the primary reasons for small suppliers folding their business and walking away, because actually the responsibility becomes so onerous on them. It's actually better for them to dissolve the company and walk away than it is to try and either fight or pay the indemnity. So don't put onerous indemnities into small supplier contracts if they can't be met. That's it. Any questions?
Oh, that's good. That's me.
Thank you very much. I'm really grateful. I'm sorry it was so long.
You've got a couple of hours now. I've got some terms. Well, you've probably got an hourly rate for that.
Well, that's what my company does. I don't know what they charge me out at. It's obviously not enough. Thank you, everybody. Oh, yes, sorry.
That was really good and enlightening. Right, next, graphical user interface design. You have to sit through this, Bernie. You got your own car.
No, I'll actually just go out and work in the lobby.
Ah, right. Take some food with you.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Okay. So what are we doing with that? Quickfire round. So yes, the conversation started in the forum about GUI design, and when I did my OU course on GUI design, I barely scraped through it because there's all sorts of stuff. Me being a programmer, I really struggled. Yeah, oh, I found it really hard. I found it interesting, but I just couldn't remember any of it. So anyway, the book that's influenced me most and helped me most is the Design of Everyday Things by Don Norton. So I'm just gonna do a couple of bits on that. And then Grace, you got something. I don't know what it was.
A bit of a blurb already.
You're a blurb, excellent. And that will lead us on to James showing us how to do graph overlays. Very interesting. No, not allowed to. So I thought I'd put that up just as a starting point. It's not a LabVIEW program, and it just shows you that it's not a problem that is uncommon. Because I see quite a lot when I go into customers and they have a LabVIEW program reviews. I don't know, is this first, is second, is third, I don't know what project, but that's very common screen. You know, all the controls, top level, do everything, everything's there. So anyway, just welcome to the book club. Time to get our pipes out. And actually, it's bottles of wine, isn't it? Anyway, Design of Everyday Things, and the predecessor book was The Psychology of Everyday Things. Is a book, and it's by a guy called Donald Norton, and it's a foundational piece, really. And this is where I kind of come from, is that you should always have this foundational knowledge, you know, software design, before you go flying into all the other things that you is trying to understand what makes a good design and what doesn't make a good design. So there's a lot of talking here about taps and doors and stuff, and gear sticks. For that. This is what my main takeouts were. It's got a lot of ideas, a lot. It can feel a little bit repetitive, but he talks about a lot of things, and he tries to get you to think of what the user is thinking when they're using your software or using your cup or whatever, and try and flip it, you know, and break down the different modes that they're thinking as they're approaching the problem they're trying to solve. So I kind of like things like natural mapping. I think software, certainly control type software, lends itself to natural mapping very well. I like to see a user interface with pipes and valves, and if the machine has pipes and valves, and I kind of like that, and that's an easy get at. You can say, oh, this you know, the way to do a naturally mapped screen. Perceived affordances, signifiers, feedback, constraints is probably my most interesting. I'm not going to explain it. You can go and read the book yourself. But these are the ideas he brings out. Constraints, to me, are probably the fundamental, easiest advantage you can have when writing software, is constraining what the user can do. So debugging that, completely that's a nightmare. If that's a wizard that says, set your regex, enter these three things, set your next, your whatever the plot is, you know, and steps you through the process, then you don't have to program all of this all at one time. It makes your software a lot simpler. So constraints are, and then talks about the different types of constraints. So there's lockouts and things like that, gateways, essentially. And gateways are very important for simplifying software. Yeah. Do not let them press this button if this is the status here. Yeah, just things like that. Culture, and it's all stories. He's got some great stories. So the cultural aspects of it are wonderful. He was talking about the one that I like was how societies, if you gave them a card with a set of cards, and it's got like a kid, and he's getting older, and he's a grown person. How would you order that card? And cultures that read left to right would go kid on the left, grown up on the right. Cultures that read right to left do it the other way around. Aborigines do it on the basis of where the sun is setting and the sun is rising, and their particular coordination to that. So if they're facing north, they will put the kid closest to them and the grown-up furthest away. South, other way around. West to east, left to right. He said it's just, you know, so you think you've got you understand cultural mappings in the software and how things go together. Well, you don't, because every culture is different. Short-term memory, that is STM, and that was another nice takeout. Is you know, in software they so if human can only remember certain things at a time. Nah, if you design based on that, your design will be bad. He said 3 to 5. Downgrade it, always downgrade it. Don't, because that's the max. You know, 7 is the max. But we took the 7 number and say, yes, that's the figure we should design to. You're always then designing to the top limit of what people can do. Actually, good design goes for simpler. So, conclusion for this: is it worth reading? Yes, it is. It's a foundational piece. You should read it. It will make you very frustrated because you'll go up to a door that's a push door and it's got a handle on it and it'll piss you off. It would just, and do you know that there's a worldwide convention on which side the hot tap should be on? I didn't know this. There's a worldwide convention. Everyone does it apart from us. We have no convention. So it's not an enormously long book. It's you'll just wander around. It'll it'll grow on you because you'll start thinking about these things, and then at some point in time you'll think, yes, this is what this means. It does make a difference. That's the book club for that. I highly advise it. The other thing I posted was this video. So why are you overthinking your UI UX with Ronan Curie? I think the link's on the forum. Well worth a watch. He's very good. It's about an hour, and he does some great case studies, various websites, and essentially he sort of says, Yeah, everyone gets bent out of shape about user experience, saying how important it is, and said, if you want to look at eBay, Amazon, he said they're all horrible, from there, but people love them because it's what they're used to. He said they break all the rules, but people love them. He said actually, the most sensible idea to get from that is actually throw something out, constrain it, so give it a very focused what it's going to do. He does a bit on that, which is quite useful in the video, which sort of shows you how to get to the nub of the matter and say, focus on this one small thing, chuck it out there, and then measure what your users are doing. Watch them, and this is what LabVIEW should be good at. You should be able to chuck the UI out quick and get feedback. And it's much better actually to do that. You get much better results than reading all the books, studying UX to, really going into great detail, because humans go off and do stuff that you don't expect, and actually he chucks up some really good examples of that. He put loads of effort into this wonderful sort of little app for people finding buses, and he had this hidden sort of thing in the background which people used like most of all. And he just wouldn't. He sat down. He said, "I wouldn't have even expected, but that's the thing that they would use the most." And people were subverting actually the use of that little app to do something else. And he said, just by that. So yes, it's well worth a watch. About an hour of your time. It gets a bit in depth in the middle. It's got some nice takeouts. So that's that. Quick. Well, that's me done for today. Okay. Greg, you're on. Food. Oh yeah, food time. You're on food. Yeah. Oh, okay. I don't know. Oh, yes. Yeah.
I just find the UI very clunky at the moment. It's a shame that I don't employ some graphic designers to push update their toolkits themselves.
But all you would see, if that was the case, is all you would see is that, but with really nice UI elements. It's people don't know the fun. People, I the time people complain about fundamental things, but they're not doing the basics.
I agree with you on that. They would just have smart things. I look at that and I think, I don't even know where to start.
With vector-based graphics, you can pretty much do anything you want. You're not restrained.
But I'm not a graphic designer to look at that sort of things and spend the time to want to do it.
Yeah, but if they give you a graphic design tool, then you can.
I probably would do it. I wouldn't design anything, I'd be playing it.
There is something. He actually in the video, he said this is website where you get all of his prototype tools.
Okay.
So they've got all like you can go Android if you want Android, and you get a set prototype, all the buttons, all the things. Because you can take that vector based stuff, so buttons. Quite easy. Nah, that's typing. But it's there, if you want to mimic
somebody's putting it more to it. It's just it's one of those things that you do in your own. What should we say about
to my mind, most customers, this is a programmer thing, most customers don't they want to be able to press a button and it go print out parts of the frame. And that's probably most of what they want from a test system is do tests, print out parts, and as soon as it
some of his requirements, he wants to capture everything. And then so, we start the test, but then we want to stop the test here and wind it back. And then halfway through, we want Michael to change the story, right? This is just unmanageable.
Yeah, but then you have to go and constrain. That's the constraint needs to come in. His requirements. Some designers programming. Requirements are similar. If you have an unstructured set of requirements, then right under structure code.
I mean, we get caught a bit with that. We didn't fully know what we wanted. Yeah, I've taken over the project from the people that did it for us because it's difficult away from, I mean, the guys have learned how to do it. So I look at it and I think, you've got wires going backwards, which is upwards. I'm just make it a bit bigger.
The only accurate requirements document is actually at the end of the program. When signed off, as you say, look at the source code. That's the accurate set of requirements. Yep.
We stand behind that. They left them without any.
It was cool because they wanted to use it in short money.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
And that's tied into the latest nation.
Absolutely, I think it's going to be an Oxfordshire.
Why do you need the latest matches? When a button will do
the most effective is the simplest they can make. You have to scroll down.
And then you have to say so they can go on all the different final. Currently, you do two different websites, do one trying to integrate the whole thing.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I didn't get a contract from you.
Your contract says the agency. I get a contract from the agency. So I think but something interesting, especially especially all the new stuff coming in. I spoke to Jackie about it. Also, because you guys use their own company, you look for Circle Solutions, and they look after a whole family of recruitment companies. One of them is ARS, which is the customer. And I said to Jackie, and then you're a big customer of that, and they can do a talk.
Yeah,
and you can talk when we just come to site.
Yes.
And actually,
involved in more of the contracts.
Get contracts in the
So that, well, that's for just tickets.
This is going to happen more.
Concept of it. Well, I'm surprised that we don't run into more problems like because think about how a project is, the finance for a project, take a test. The way they raise the finance for that is to say, well, this product here, if we test 10,000 offers, we'll make this much money, and you'll get those big, this big sort of projection about how much money this test is. And it's a lot of fun. But of course, if you take the negative, the liability, what happens if you don't? There's a rack of these products. The cost per day is enormous. Yeah, and it's surprising. I mean, it shows in a way that generally we work for nice people and nice places, but the actual liability is quite serious.
Well, one of the, it could have been worse.
And we've never ran into any of that. But you do look at it. It takes 3 hours to be there. I would say the common issues around projects can be, so vague, but the liability is late. And it could be just the fact that it's quite a new project. So they get chosen because companies are doing much. Quite often you get these unreasonable time.
And that's a lot of their job, but it's just nothing very much.
Oh, that's quite scary. I looked at that.
Let's just think about products. If you, I mean, I suppose you just show me practice.
That's actually negligent. Yeah. And the courts are fairly sensitive. You have to, you don't ever want to get especially outside.
Clearly, well, yeah, they're quite well established.
Well, it's hideous, isn't it? That's not the kind of work I want to be in.
And that doctor who's just been struck off. It was done to really touch it.
We're going to agree.
Oh, sure, yeah. I didn't know what to think about
And people know. There was all this, if somebody else was struck off for inventing.
Doing this, yeah,
Inventing things without. So she was sort of the opposite and then attacked her.
Yeah, I used that story.
I think she was just about to start anyway.
Technology and engineering.
They'll let you run it.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Thank you, 7:45. Yesterday, just thankfully managed to get the last few.
Yes, I think the last time I tried to throw me out, throw me out.
Sorry.
So an hour and a half or 11, that's just 10. 2 hours.
Yeah. I'm not. Give it time, I'll be. I'm guessing everyone's on hand. And I think you ridiculously.
Well, prototype running gear and stuff like that.
Within about 6 inches of keyboard.
I don't actually know if it's got with.
So I started off just so it's switch. So let me try this.
So
basically, what are you trying to do?
And I'm thinking to starting to talk.
I think one of the tales he says in that book,
So,
you know, you
yeah.
go down a hard way, someone's flying through. But actually, it's taking all the way in. What you want is a hole. You don't actually want a drill. You don't want a drill. You want a hole.
Yeah.
That's it's pushing it all the way back to actually what are people trying to do. It's the first
They really don't like asking what they want. They've made a decision on what they're going to do, and they often don't tell you actually what to do.
I'm very lucky actually with the job.
Yeah,
I get such good feedback.
He came from the customer. End of this. You see all the solar cells on the reservoir. Lose the speed.
On the reservoir?
Yeah.
Over the top?
I
probably read the Stevenson reservoir, the one that they did.
I think it was in Staines.
No, reservoir. This is a solar farm.
Huge. In fact, there's loads of them around this now.
I know. Smiths are going to do even more. What?
No, not well. I don't think
I think we rolled a lot of bird down over it. How effective it was.
Which are clean enough.
I was all aware with some trouble on the with that.
Yeah. It's a bit last minute.
I prefer to do it, yes.
Did I see you marching on Sunday?
Yeah. I've then had to go to Stevenage to pick Eileen up from contest. Two of the bands were at contest. Well, I hadn't gone the day before. But A band got Talbot all again.
Oh, good.
Which was particularly good because the other two bands came rushed. You were now
Yes. There's a building there that's been about 5 years now.
Yeah.
So it was rented.
The idea is one space.
You did look a bit.
Space means you do the same.
But so that group's on site.
I was saying cost of the time.
Well, they weren't expecting us in the end. We said, look,
No, I said
Nothing
no,
groundbreaking. This is nothing groundbreaking. This is just.
it was more of a walk than a mile.
Who wants ground?
oh, well, that was
Things like
it's
just something I just don't get.
It was really nice going to Chelsea Road.
And the information on the internet is how to design a mobile phone app. It's not really the same. How to design a web page. It's not really the same. It's so difficult to find specific.
It's difficult to describe what is good. You know when it's bad.
Yeah, and
but it's difficult to say what's a good one.
And it's just for a test.
Well, you have to get
So why this is my view.
Yes.
But my view of what a joint sort of presentation would be is so taking the concept of constraints, for example, this is how you do constraint stuff and actually take
what slots do you get for the presentation?
what slots might we get?
Yeah, when you're on your own.
Actually, no, I haven't turned the video off. This is all on a human assumption.
I think it would be pretty self-determined. That's how I done it.
Well, this is a user group track.
The secret.
Kill you now. It's not been proved yet.
It is almost definite. I just think.
Oh, okay.
It's still not technically, but everyone's real words.
So,
Can't you just slip it in and then just print out 5,000 agendas and it's just there? I mean, they can't really say no.
Why not have a room that
the
you
biggest, yeah, Westminster Arts. Westminster Arts.
The lift for space.
We used to have some user interaction with audience participation.
Yeah, I think
So
you're
you
right.
run up, everyone runs up and just
Have you not put forward your
Yeah.
user group
I don't know what we're going to call it now.
attendance for your recertification?
Yes, I have. But normally I emailed somebody and they send you a response.
Oh, I never get responses back.
And then I forward that response to the recertification program. But if the way Steve said, we need to just think about it before. There's no saying I was there. So it's
All I've ever done in the past is I list all the events that I've been to and just send them straight to recertification. And I quote Steve as the person that's leading the actual user group. That's all I've done for recertification by points. I will just write down the fact that I went to NI Days and I went to the CSLUG Summit and any user groups I've been to, and I just say that you organised the user group and I was there, and then leave it up to them to chase back to find out whether they needed it. That's all I've done on the recertification by points in the past. Because I'm 2019. Well, I've got 2019 because I was trying. I think it should be part of the profile, and you just put it in on your profile, and you just there's a section on the profile that if once you're on there, you just go in there and say, well, I went to this event, and that gets pushed through on the profile. And I can't see any reason why it isn't really. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does make a lot.
Rather than having to email somebody that you don't know where it is, because sometimes you get a response from Germany, and other times it comes back from the States, and I had somebody from Scandinavia on my renewal, came through from Scandinavia, and I think, oh, God. But nothing seems to be linked together on anything as far as I can see, which...
It's a little informal, isn't it?
Yeah. They are making changes to the profiles, but I don't know in what respect.
Well, I've got two. I've tried to get them migrated together, but...
Yeah, good luck with that.
I'm giving up with that.
It can't be as difficult as trying to change your contract on Vodafone. I was counting the hours you spent on the phone with chat lights was about 15 hours. BT was worse though.
Well, BT, you never
6
actually know
engineers.
that you're going to get through the right person.
6 engineers and they admitted it because they turned me off the big change.
A friend of mine, she was so angry when she was dealing with BT, she cried. Now that's customer service. They make you cry.
Going back to the days of dial-up, I had a DAX set in the garage, so it split the line in the garage. And I tried to get them to come and take it out, and they said, no, I was at 28k at the time. I said, I don't want 28k because that's split, so I want the full 56k. And they said, no, I can't do that. I said, oh, so what you're telling me is you won't send anybody out to take this out so that I get full 56k. And they said, no, I can't do that. I said, oh, well, I guess that I'll have to go in my garage and hit it with a stick or something as I was turning around to break it, and then you come and take it and fix it. And they said, but that'd be damaging our equipment. I said, can you put me through a technical?
I think they go through training experience.
They put me through to an engineer.
I think they seem especially good at bad practice.
Yeah, they go to training to be as how difficult can you be.
They put me through an engineer, and the engineer said, oh, the reason that you're not getting the full speed, it's got one of these splitters in the garage. And I said, I know. He said, I'll put you back through the customer service, and they'll organise one of the engineers to come and get it out. I said, no, I've been talking to them. has already. They won't do it. He said, "I'll create the job here and get somebody."
They get through to an engineer, usually okay.
What's,
I like that when they put you on hold. Apparently they've got software that if you shout and bell up, you get pushed up the queue.
I spent 3 months trying to get my mother proper cable, like better cable, and there was obviously something wrong with their system, like some weird problem with their account. Because every time they arranged it, no one would come. They apologized. They give her like 3 years, but they still no one would come. So she wouldn't have a free amount of things that she wasn't getting. And eventually, my brother just went outside, found the little filter boxes that stopped her getting the best cable, and just took it out and put it together again, and then it worked.
Right, great, you're on.
So I put an idea on the user group, or the forum, just some user interface ideas. Something I'm battling with, something I don't quite get. It's always either too crazy, like the one Steve showed, or it's not enough. I just never quite understand it. So this is just a couple of searches that I did and narrowed it down to what I think applies. A lot of this is probably copied from the style, is in one of the LabVIEW style guides, and I think it might be a good idea for what I'm wanting to put it into a style guide section, maybe on user interfaces. So it's just a bunch of points. Status bars. I don't know how many times I've seen software with no status bar. You push a button and something maybe happens. You don't really know. I think that's really important, providing immediate feedback to the user, because everybody now is used to pushing a button and something happens instantly. So that immediate feedback, I think, needs to be there. If you want people to set up something, for instance, running a test, most of my work is in test development. So when you want to run a test, you need to enter a serial number, product number, who's doing the tests, and there's certain information that needs to be put in. Having a flat interface with just different control buttons or control options, you always forget something, or you forget to change something, or you run the test on a wrong product. I think the wizards are the way to go. And I've started having a thought about how to do it. I'm not quite there yet, but the wizard is there. Using a tab control is quite nice when you hide the tabs. And you only
tab control into a state machine.
Yeah, and then you enable the different tabs as you progress along. And also keeping what information you want from the user short. This is something I got from an idea that they used on web forms. Don't give a user a form this long to fill in, because it's just not going to do it properly. Rather break it up into small chunks and give them more pages and guide them through a shorter process. Then at least it keeps the interaction there.
Have a go back key.
Yes, a back, definitely.
Automate.
Yeah. I think I got this from the video that you were talking about, having a normal user and super users. Super users use shortcuts. I don't know how many of you use Quick Drop or shortcut keys in LabVIEW. I use them all the time. And it's nice to have those in your application, but keep them common. Don't, when you want a help file, use Control-J. It just doesn't work. So try and keep them common for standard Windows, or I'm not quite sure what the Mac ones are.
No one cares.
No one cares. These are two paragraphs I've copied and pasted directly from a website. I got the links later on. The Craigslist one, it's an ugly website, but it works. And then the Steve Jobs quote, which I quite liked, is design is not just what it looks like and feels like, design and how it works. You can have a really pretty interface and it works rubbish. But you can also have a rubbish interface and it works really well behind the scenes. That middle ground, I think, is the place I struggle to find, is that what's a nice interface, but also what works well. So I'm just not going to read the whole quote. I'll put this up and you can go through it. Style tips. This is a lot of this is actually in the LabVIEW style guide, but this I found on a web, which I liked the tie-up. Autofocus when you want the user to start. set your tab controls in the correct order. That does my head in when you push tab and it jumps somewhere else all the way around. Try and set your tabs up in the correct order.
Or it will disappear.
Sorry?
Or it will disappear.
Yeah, just go somewhere, you just don't know where it is. The other thing is to set tabs, if you're using a tab control, setting the tab order for the controls in the tab control, you've got to select the menu of the tab control. You can't use the normal set tabbing order. I can show you an example in LabVIEW. That took me a while to figure out. Tip strips is quite nice. When you don't, using tip strips means you don't really have to label all your controls. It also saves space. They do sometimes get.
They sit in front of you.
I did it so
Yeah.
the user could turn them on and off.
There we go. That's quite a nice option. Yeah.
Because otherwise you just like.
We
Yeah.
tend to turn them on because it was a tiny touch screen. We just tend to turn them on.
Oh wow.
Because
And that's the other option.
They pop up all the way. That's
Pretty
right,
much,
that's
yeah.
why I
It's
turned
like
them
set,
on.
I've
That's
never
why
worked on
I
touch
made
screens,
it
so-
vulnerable. For when
It's just
people
interesting,
learn it.
the different, and I think you've got the different types of people as well.
Yeah. Add labels inside control inputs. I'll show you a picture of that. That's something I've never thought about, but it actually makes a lot of sense. Oh no, sorry, not that one. Add labels inside. So when you have a control input as a text control and you want someone to enter a username, set the default text to username and in lighter color. And then when they click in, the event deletes it out and you can type it in. That saves the control.
There's an X control.
Is there an X
On
control?
tools networks.
that like also-
Cepheid, don't they?
Yeah,
It's an extra dependency, one. But
Okay.
it's, they do.
because that's quite a nice way of not having labels on all your controls. Because that also, I find, clutters
And anyway,
Any
it should be
space.
captions.
or captions, yeah.
It's actually using status bar to do that. So when they click in a box, you've got the long area in the status
Yeah.
bar, you put in there what it is that
Oh, wow,
they do
okay.
when they're in that one.
It's
So
not a
it
bad
saves
idea.
you on the tip strip, it's always in one place. You can turn it on and off because it's just in one place
Yeah.
for what you're using it for. And it's always in the same appropriate size font.
And you don't have to fight with deleting text out of a. That's not a bad idea.
If you check out the Cepheid thing,
Okay.
and what I did is I downloaded it, looked at it, thought it was really good. Never used it again.
Lots of people don't look at that. They only
But it is-
control, they're not looking at
It's
Be
very
wary of
web.
it.
It's a very web-based thing. It's a very web-based thing that they've auto-filled
No.
to tell you what to do.
Yeah, no, I like it.
Then the bottom one, using verbs in buttons. This is something I've never thought about. I'll show you a picture next, which just clears it up. This is a Windows versus Mac, and Mac wins. Save changes to test document. Yes, no, cancel. Or do you want to save changes? Don't save, cancel, or save. That just
I do make sense.
it just makes sense. It's something, and it's one of those things. A picture says 1,000 words, and I thought that was
Particularly about in boxes where it's like, you have to think, like,
yeah. Are they asking
The
you
wrong
for a yes
answer,
or a no
I'm
answer?
like, do you want to cancel? Yes. Or do you want to not, if you do this, you want me to do that. Do you want to not continue with that? It's like,
Yeah.
it's-
So,
I want to-
Having
yes,
the,
not
having the
continue.
actual name in the button, I find that clears that up.
Yeah, but that's I don't like that at all because it's don't save and cancel. What's the difference? Different thing.
Well,
If that's really ambiguous. That's
yes.
This is
Okay,
when
maybe
you
that's not.
exit, when you close.
That's
Maybe
it.
that's
That's
not-
the exit. It does make sense because it's you pressed exit and that's the exit gateway.
Oh, do you want to cancel closing the document?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
It's like-
it's an idea.
I'll pick up from that, just as well.
2 web pages. Now these are. I used one of these.
Oh,
Oh, that died.
you did it.
Ah, doesn't matter. Why did that die?
How about this user interface?
The shortcut keys.
What is that doing? I'm just going to plug it in again.
Windows P.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, I won't go. Oh, there we go. Hang on a minute. If I open that up. So 2 web pages I found, and I'll show you the differences of them. I first found that one. Now, yeah, forget about the ads and everything on the outside, but that's the content, and it's quite easy to read. Nice short rows, and it's quite nice to follow down. The other web page has pretty much the same information, I didn't even read it because it just.
It's like a wiki page.
Yeah, it does, and it's like by the time I've got to the end of the row, I've forgotten what the beginning of the row said. So
Yeah, but
this might not be good for our applications, but it's just something that I found.
But you've taught yourself to ignore adverts. A lot of other people find that very complicated. The other one.
I can order it. I
Yeah.
just look at the adverts. Really.
Is there a difference between documentation and usability?
It could.
Because I
Yeah.
would like the other page, my documentation, because that's what I'm puzzling and scratching my head and trying to work out exactly what to do. And I really want to
Yeah.
concentrate on what's written. Whereas if I just want presented information and get something quick, that's more the user interface help or helpfulness.
Okay.
The other stuff.
I think the less information you have, the better we're going to go back to short-term.
Yes, yes.
Just
Keeping it simple.
And I think we're getting worse. I mean, I find it quite a struggle now to read a book. I used to be voracious reader, and I just got old. But I find it very hard sitting down and read a book in a linear fashion.
That's what I
just stop doing it now.
Yeah. So a bit of LabVIEW ideas. I found the classic panel, the classic palette. Although it's always hidden by default, it's the best to edit. I use system a lot. I prefer system, but you can't edit them.
Yeah.
You can't change the colors in it.
You can't do
Can't change the
customize.
colours.
You can't
Because
customize.
that's the system.
Yeah, because it's system. So that's why I generally use system. But if I want to edit something, I'll go straight to
Strictly
classic.
speaking, you could change the rule. You could change the colour by changing the system. I had a tab example. That's not too important. And if you're using Windows 8, it might only be 8.1. I'm not sure. There's an option to scale your Windows environment. That does not work very nicely if you move it to another PC that hasn't got that on, because LabVIEW doesn't scale. So it looks nice in Internet Explorer and Word, but as soon as you go away to another machine, it doesn't work. So what it does is, my understanding is, because laptops have now got such high definition, if they keep the pixel ratio the same, everything's really small. So they scale it up to make it look nice and clear, but it's bigger than 100%. But if you move that away to a version of Windows that doesn't have that option, when your two controls are next to each other, they're all of a sudden a lot further apart or they're overlapping. It just breaks things. So
I also found that I make a interface that's all resizable, but I'll design it a certain size, like sort of.
Yeah.
But then the users want a huge screen, it'll hit full screen, and I'm like, boom!
Gaps in
Real controls here, here.
So
That's all wrong.
yeah, it's
Well, so, I mean, the rules of resizing are some things you want to resize, some things you don't want. To my mind, you don't want to get it bigger.
no.
What do you do when you see this big screen and the little buttons like appear on the screen?
Yeah, but there's things that, I mean, the things I've learned doing this job, there's things that actually scale quite well. So graphs, for example.
Yeah.
There's stuff you don't
There are
really.
different ways you can.
There's stuff you don't really want to scale. You know, like buttons. And in fact, you actually want them to live alongside a graph or in a certain position. So you have to write a lot of code saying, oh, the bottom of the graph is here, then the button goes just below it. So.
I find if you group them and you move them right to the edge, it'll probably take them to the corner.
But going back to the limiting the amount of information, so to cope with that, what I've said in my sort of application is I minimise the amount of things on my screen, and then you open up a dialog box which doesn't scale. So you just you have certain things. So I've got like a tab that comes in on the side which doesn't scale. It's a strict type def. And that's it. That's a very easy way to make stuff not scale. Just make it strict type def.
I've been using sliders a lot.
Yeah, you bring them in. But you do have to think about that. I mean, people aren't used to thinking like that. But you have to sort of say, well, what do I want to get bigger and what don't I want to? What do I want to keep in relation to what? They set my laws, really, aren't you? I mean, our standard way is saying to the customer, well, you know, you're paying us thousands of pounds to write software. Provide a computer and give me the screen and I'll write software and I'll fix it to the screen that you want. And that causes an awful lot less problems. I mean, you can't always do that, but you can in quite a lot of situations.
That issue, Greg, I think is mainly because now everybody's sticking high DPI displays in tiny little 13-inch laptops.
There we go, yeah.
You run the thing at native resolution, or at least write your application so that it looks good on native resolution. I think essentially you're doing 4:1 pixels.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Parameter he's got a tip for Mac users. So it'll be about 10 minutes behind. So. I can't tell mine's about 10 minutes, guys. I have a tip for Mac users. There is very cheap Photoshop-like software that allows you to create vector images of any kind. Pixelmator.
Yeah,
yeah, and I was.
That's what you. Some of the.
No, there's this toolkit. So in the video that I showed, there's this guy. There's a load of toolkits. It's actually for prototyping user interfaces. So you can go, I want to prototype a Windows user interface, and it's got lots of vector. Also with PowerPoint. So it's got lots of vector-based controls that you can sit down in your PowerPoint and create a user interface. But because they're vector-based, you can swipe it and stick it on your funky button, so you can get like an Android one and you can swap all the buttons over.
Cool.
But you have to pay for it, so I'm still interested.
This is also pulled from a Wikipedia page, which I just found. I'm not going to read through it, but
this is by the designer school, not doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So design of user interface, keep it simple, show what you want to be shown, and hide the rest, or use dialog boxes. Provide feedback for inputs. What else is there?
Too much text.
Yeah, too much text. Bad user interface.
I mean, the simple things I do is like, I've got a little tick against a string. A string's a good place to put those up, but for a lot of stuff that goes into a database, you don't want to duplicate it, so you just do a test, and if it's okay, you give it a tick, and then you enable a button, and you have that programmed into the way that you work. So if you stick a string in, you test it against something. You have this little tick that says it's okay. If it's not okay, you disable the okay button. And following those kind of rules, which is the tolerance principle, you could save yourself an awful lot of debugging. Because you then, by handling it the easy point, you're not then worrying about buggering up your database, for example, or all the other things that could go wrong by you entering bad data. So it's worth putting those constraints at the front end, gateways at the front end, makes your life easier.
Also, when they press /var, they're trying to do a file, but they're not. It's just text, so just won't let them do it. Just delete it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay, and that's just the links really that I found.
Apparently there's some comments, Dave, on the live chat.
There's a live chat? I didn't even know there was a live
Could be why. Apparently on the YouTube page.
Is that? I can't monitor it all.
Did someone have to message you?
They have to bring me. I can't see it. Oh, look, there they are, yeah. Oh, there's a big one.
You can never put it on the screen.
Oh, yeah, resizing. Fabiano says resizing can be helped using panes. In fact, you have to use them.
Yeah, you have to use them.
You've got no choice.
Stick to left and right.
Yeah, so your status bar, for example.
It's always it's always a guess. Do I stick it left? Do I stick it right? Do I auto-size it? What do I auto-size it with?
It can still go wrong as well.
Yeah.
And there's rules you can apply to panes as well that make your life easier by sticking everything like that you don't want to expand to the left. And so it kind of helps.
You want to put them in early rather than when you started developing it, because the origin shifts.
Well, I think it's,
because I had real problems with.
I think
there's something on the user group about it. I had issues with it, and
I think you just have to think a lot more about it. At the moment you say we want to resize this panel, you just have to really think about what you want to resize and in what axis. And do you want the text to resize a little? Do you just want like tables? Do you just want to see columns? Just so many questions it throws up.
well, one of the applications I've got, I used to have a lot of data, too much for on one screen, and I just shift the origin. So you've got what looks like a big matrix of screens, and you just move to the corner of each matrix.
Okay.
So you've got all the data is available on the screen itself, but you're only showing a sub part of it, and then you just move where you want.
Presentation package.
So it's but putting Payne on that, forget it, because it just shifts where everything's related to. It's the original origin moves. So you've got to, and then you've got to try and work out where it was again, and then put something in to actually. You can't set the origin manually.
I always put a control that I knew always want to be top left, so I always based it on that. It moved around.
Yeah.
How hard do people find to say this is the way a user interface should look versus what the end user thinks it should look like? Where do you start guiding? Where do you start having to argue back?
I think you have to argue back always. There has to be a conversation. Most of my users don't necessarily worry too much about what it looks like. They worry about what it goes back to the authorities is what it does and how it does it. So essentially, it's the sensible stuff, like not allowing them to make mistakes. Not allowing them bad data to be more interested in that than if it's orange or those kind of considerations. Most users don't worry about. I wouldn't say all, but some do. You get people who hate the Times New Roman for something. It's just some case of fault. But I think you have to argue. I was sort of saying about the original requirement I had for this job was to have an MDI type docking graph thing, because that's what their existing software. You have to say, well, try this instead, because doing that and have users next to that's not possible, isn't it? Not far off. It's quite hard, and you have to sort of say, well, this thing you asked is not very easy for LabVIEW to do. But actually, what you want to see is lots of graphs on the screen and be able to resize them and move them about. Now, that you can do that. That's just a conversation, and you show them, and oh yeah, that's much better. It's not a doc, it's not an MDI, which is what they were used to. Yeah. But you just have to. It's always a compliment.
Is that an isolated case, or do you find that you're getting more and more requests for things that you can't do it? I don't think expectations change because of the web and iOS and things like that. Absolutely. People have wanted to do things.
Well, the only one we got at the moment is my system, where everyone's like 20 years old.
Yeah. Yes, I've got that. So the result of 30 years of work, we've got this really good user interface. No, I'm not even going to look at it. We're going to do a bit of data.
No, but I think if you do more commercial facing stuff, then you probably will get that. I mean, I'm trying to think if anything we do is actually commercial facing. I don't really think it is. I mean, we're not making products for customers to sell, but I think in that world, you probably would be under pressure.
They wanted to look pretty like the web.
Well, that's why we've got Java and C guys now.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised what you can do with LabVIEW. You've seen the stuff that Mike's been working on recently. It does not look like LabVIEw at all.
But we've always prided ourselves that on LabVIEw doesn't necessarily look like LabVIEw. Going back to LabVIEw 5, we had systems out there which didn't look like LabVIEw. But it is possible.
You've got to work at it to do it, though, haven't you?
Just make everything flat. Use your own graphics.
Yeah.
Oh, talking of which,
recently I've been doing something like that. I've been trying to feel what the web looks like. I've started to use Google's icons because they provide free icons you can use. So, and one of the problems I have with users is that those who are familiar with LabVIEW have long since learned never to look at the menus, because they've long learned that the menus is full of options that they don't understand and very useless. So other users actually will not find anything under the menus, period. And also I want to increase discoverability, because I like to, rather than have lots of buttons, I like to use right-click menus. Where you do things. The problem is users don't necessarily know those exist. And so one thing I've done is Google will use, this may be familiar, this is the more options button, or called the hamburger menu, which you click on. All it does is the exact same thing as if you right-click on the graph. It's doing nothing else. But it's there where the user can discover it. And this is actually a system button. I'm following their they don't put boxes around the buttons unless you actually put the mouse over it. And that's a system button where the first image I've just replaced with a white square so you can't actually see it. And so it disappears when you haven't go over it.
I'm a big fan.
Also here, there's little 3 dots. That's also something Google has everywhere. That's the more options on a little thing, right? So rather than more options for everything, which is the hamburger button, this is more options on the thing right next to it. And all that does, again, is exactly the same as if you right-click on the graph. But the user can say, oh, what's that? Put their mouse over it and discover these extra options.
Have you configured that, or is that the actual menu? I mean, is that your own menu?
Yeah, it's a custom menu. It's actually the same custom menu the graph has.
Yeah.
So it's just the button or the graph both trigger the same menu. And the button is just there to be something that the user can see and then realize there are options here. Because they won't right-click on things. It's much harder to see. And another thing I like to have user interfaces with most of the options in menus because it's actually quite easy to add options if it's in a menu. It's just another text string, and the text string triggers something, some key structure to do something. I only leave a few buttons actually on the screen, the ones that you always need to see. Basically, buttons that are actually showing you something about what is going on that you want to see.
You can dynamically fire that as well.
Well, they trigger. You can often put them in multiple places, like in the menu or not. And that I hope is more discoverable by people than here because they won't look here. Now, another thing I want to talk about, I know before I was going to talk about these kinds of things that appear on a graph. And this is just with a graph, you have the option to provide a picture to go on the back of the graph or in front of the graph. And you can just use the 2D picture controls to draw your picture. And it's a little slow because you got to use property nodes to get all the information. You need to know, what the distance is from here to here in pixels, and what is the distance in here to here in units of your graph. This is actually getting information from here, so it's actually reading in the data and doing analysis and things. So it's actually kind of slow because the property nodes, but it's fast enough.
Is it better than the annotation?
Well, you have much more options than annotations.
Yeah, I've tried to use it then.
They're quite hard to position.
Yeah, I'm going to give up.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it's just you do it to the point you realize, like, well, I want to make my line a dotted line, and you find you can't make it a dotted line. There's no programming way to make it a dotted line, and so.
I mean, that is a nice, sensible functionality. You should be able to see what's going on.
You can see there's a delay as I move it. You can see it actually falls behind, so it's got a slowness problem.
I don't think that's an issue, though, is it? I mean,
no, it's not.
I can see it. You can see it move. You can see it catch up.
The only thing we do it, you can't say I've moved the cursor, redraw, because you can get behind. Yeah. You got to say I moved the cursor, so I need to redraw when I'm not busy, and then when you're not busy, then you redraw it.
Yeah, because there's some things if you say if it changed, it has loads of events.
Yeah, if you drag this, it fires about 20 events per second, and so if and there's all the other events, there's like scales change and stuff, so you can actually fall behind.
Yeah, or you can actually just monitor it and say once you've stopped moving for a little while.
Yeah.
And I've done that before. It's fairly effective.
Yeah. But there's quite other things. You got to know when this pane size changes because you got to redraw it if they make the pane bigger or smaller. Yeah. So there's lots of other things, and if the scale changes, then you got to redraw it. So you got quite a few events you got to tie into. And the problem you find doing this is that you'll find that the events are not complete. You can't get every information from events. You can't find it when programmatically. When someone writes to this, there's no event fired unless you use value signaling, which is expensive. So you end up having to have a polling as well. So it gets kind of clunky because the event system is not complete. But it does work. But rather than talk about the details of that, I want to talk about the control over here. This is also a picture control. And to try and increase discoverability, which is like the user who is unfamiliar figures out what they can do, when you move over something, it actually will provide information. So it provides, it's hard to see, if I need a little bigger.
Just new to this application, I'm sure you should.
Yeah, well, I think I'm talking about it, of course. Not issue also. So yeah, so when you go over, it'll say this is the Fourier transform component. That's it, if you click that for the settings. Some of these have a disable button. You can disable, enable it. Give the name. There's also a little more button. And again, the more button is just a little icon that says, you know, you can click on this. If you click on the more button, all it does is turn your right clicks into left clicks, which opens the menu of this picture control. Right, so that's all. So it's just there to point out that you can actually click on this and get some extra options. So, oops, more button. So if you click on it, you get the extra buttons. All that is, that's exactly the same as if you right click on it. Yep. It's just, I just made it so that the user can see. So I'm hoping, again, this is more inspired by, actually YouTube, I guess, putting videos on YouTube and their kind of interface. And the idea is that you keep things hidden, but as the user goes around, they can discover the things. So the fact that these things appear tells them that, oh, you can do something with these.
So that wasn't just a picture.
Yes, what this is, I'll show you in a second.
Because that's a lot better than flipstrips. Exactly. I mean, that's.
So is that a tip strip?
Oh, yeah, there's a tip strip there. I have some tip strips as well.
Tip strip with options.
But yeah, but these are actually, I'll just show you in a second.
Yeah. Because yeah, they do get annoying.
So what I have, I do it with there's a class, but I mean, it could be just a cluster. But basically this holds the information. What icons, where should they go? What options do these things have? Can they be enabled, disabled, and so on? And you have a number of things that you call on it. So whenever this is mouse down, so when you go mouse down, first of all, you tell it, click the mouse down. It will say, it will figure out from the mouse coordinates what you clicked on. And it will actually tell you, if you click on the settings button, then you can do code for that. But also, it knows where the mouse is. And based on that, you, in the draw picture part, you can see the picture there. I'm not going to show this because it's really ugly. When you actually start drawing things, there's a lot of code. And you got to say, well, what's the font, and what's the color, and what's the brush size, and it gets really ugly. But it basically comes down to if start again. But basically, there's nothing particularly complicated about it. You just go through, I have an array of icons, and I have an array of positions. So go to the first position, draw the icon, go to the second position, draw the icon. And then you go, well, actually, this is the selected thing that's in the, so I'll actually draw a draw box around it.
Picture thing. How big's the
Picture it all down to here, so you can add
Oh,
things.
right. It's a virtual.
Yeah, so it's just a picture.
It's a VP.
And behind it is a class, and the class has an array of icons, an array of positions, the information about them, how to draw them. And then as you move the mouse around, you tell it where the mouse is. And if it says, well, the mouse is over this region, then I will draw the name of this thing, and I will draw the buttons that you can use, and so on. So it's just, it's all, as you move the mouse around, it's repeatedly redrawing the picture.
I'm glad you found it out. I always used to feel a bit inferior because I looked at the picture stuff and did it really hard.
It's not so hard, it's fiddly. It's fiddly. Right? You gotta say, well, I gotta draw a box from here to here, right? I draw a box and I gotta do this and this.
Kind of view it.
I gotta calculate where this pixel position is and how big it should be, and I gotta add 2 pixels to make it go around, and then, you know, it's just, it's not hard. It's a lot of steps and it's really ugly. Because you got wires everywhere.
Like if you know you've got to add 2 to make it go round, you just automatically put 2.
Yeah, you just add 2. Yeah, sometimes you add a constant. Like these positions. If so, there. See, there's a position for the settings button. So I have an inline VI that says where the position is. So both the thing that draws it and the thing that actually looks where it be clicked knows where it is. And then there's the enable disable. That's another thing. So you can move them around and so on.
James, have you used that concept in other user interfaces as well? That kind of picture control hierarchy of
No, that's the first time. Let me just start this one. So even this, we see the numbers? The actual components, when they're taking data, they will send they actually send another copy of their icon. My icon has changed to this. And it is drawing in the different, the icons. So these components, each one of these components is whenever they are doing things, they can add information themselves to their icon and send it off, and to be presented in the user interface. So the numbers aren't being done by this guy; it just receives a new icon to update. And I think it takes them like 1 or 2 milliseconds to draw the picture, so it's not fast. But as a user interface thing, that's not a problem.
Yeah, that's 20 times faster than humans kill it.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you put those numbers on silly?
Yeah, to give the user some idea what's going on. Because the other problem is just a bunch of pictures, they don't know what's going on. Particularly if something isn't working or something isn't configured. And we're like, oh, I see nothing, it's broken. I want them to be able to see that it's not getting through. So, also, you see some of these buttons. I've been following Google where the button has no box around it unless you put the actual mouse over it, which does look nice actually.
I like it. I think it's really good. I tend to use those buttons all the time. There's a toolkit, isn't there?
There's a toolkit. There's a list of Google material icons. It's called.
There's also it's on the VI package manager. It's user which is Silver Controls 2 or something.
It's
System Controls 2.
It's system controlled, system UI controlled, something like that.
Yeah. And they're easy.
A couple of different versions of it.
So see now, this is putting out a warning. It's not taking data because there's something wrong, and you can actually go to it and ask what the problem is. It's because something upstream is not set the way it's supposed to be.
I think there's a little active there as well, so that's slow.
Now you can see, now the user can learn, okay, this is working. You know, we're actually getting data through the system. So yeah, so I like the 2D picture control. It's really old, that's why it's slow. And it could do with being improved, but you can do a lot with it. Just the idea is you draw the control, but you draw the control from information that you've got in a cluster somewhere. And so you can, when a mouse moves over it, you know what you've moved over. You can redraw it to show or do whatever thing you require. So you have buttons. Instead of having buttons, you actually construct all your buttons. And the user thinks there's a bunch of buttons to push.
Yeah, no, I think it's always the get out, isn't it? I use it very much.
But I like the buttons appearing because it shows them, you know, it's just as useful. You move to the thing and then you move to the button. Right. Oops. The wrong button.
Well, and I think it sort of shows you that, you know, it's LabVIEW, but you couldn't say, I mean.
Yeah, and it's more like web browsers.
Yeah.
Right. I'm trying to make it so that the user is more familiar with it.
Yeah.
So that's a bunch of buttons and more. I can click on this.
Yeah.
It's not perfect. I have a problem. I don't get as much feedback from the users.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Was that fun? Is that better? Worse? But I do know that there's one person who just that menus on LabVIEW programs are just invisible to them.
Yeah.
For good reason, because most programs have menus that the user has no interest in, other than maybe.
I've used that extensively now. Again, it's not very good for touchscreen. But you have the other option.
We have another way of doing it.
Yeah. But it's the same process.
And menus in general allow you to add features. I'll give an example, but allow you to add options quickly. Because just here's a bunch of options, pick one, and then the pick one is just a string which you then trigger whatever. Yeah. So various things. Oh, here's an interesting thing. This is different. So this configures these two regions down here below. And so if you want to say, it's a configuration box, but say I want to make the color yellow. I can apply it and it changes immediately. And I say that was stupid, I'll cancel it and go back. So it's an asynchronous configuration box that allows you to apply the settings. And then
That's what people expect.
Yeah.
Like if you're choosing a font, things expected.
Definitely a cancel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We run all of our.
Apply is kind of a frill, but a cancel is very important.
This is maybe a question for you as well. When you have got a tabbing order, did you find a way how to tab inside the clusters? Because when you have got a few controls on the front panel, and these controls are clusters, you cannot tap from the control inside the control, inside the item inside the cluster. Did you find a way around?
I haven't tried that.
Nah, programmatically is probably the only way.
How many people actually use tabs? I think we all do, because we used to.
I never use tabs on anything.
But if you look at a lot of users, they don't even go Control C to copy. So the tab is.
I try to get.
Then you get someone who does, and they hit
little attention to them at all.
If you have control buttons, they should be in the option. So it should be right click, copy, Control C. So people will learn to use them.
Yeah, no, but a lot of normal users don't ever learn those keys.
My memory for control is very limited.
Yeah.
I learn about one a year.
I mean, the same applies when you're looking for references to all the controls on the screen. It's just, you have to use a term for it. Iterative program or something.
Yeah, follow to find out.
Yeah, you have to go around. So, recursive.
Yeah.
You have to do it recursive.
If it's a cursor, then you can actually do controls and find the name.
Yeah. So I've got a little recursive tool that goes, give me more controls. Does it? It's cool, mate. Been working on that one a while, haven't you?
Yeah.
We struggle with feedback from customers, don't we? We like it.
Well, the feedback you get is, can you put the company logo on there?
So you have to find some bad or good users. Just watch their work.
I'm really lucky at the moment. Project I'm working on because brilliant. Yeah, his feedback is, clinical and it's correct and it's thorough and it's great. It's such a pleasure to work.
But then he might not find the potholes.
Oh no, he finds enough. Right. On for the next bit. You'll,
someone time for this.
Oh yeah. I don't know. Go, do it.
So this is going to be a talk that I'm planning on giving at the Berlin CLA Summit. I wrote it yesterday, so I haven't practiced it. I don't know how long it's going to take. But the basic idea is, it might be kind of technical, but it's in the CLA Summit. How many people write applications where they have things that send messages to other things? And is that kind of like a major part of how you do things? Like you have different modules, data acquisition, logging, etc. Okay, now there's another school of thought. But did you put your hand up? Do you use lots of messages?
Do I use lots of messages?
Yes. I was going to say, what can you? This is sort of from an older way of doing it. It's just everything with SubVIs. So maybe we may have one loop, and then you call SubVIs and things. It might be LCOD.
Yep.
Action engine. Could be an action engine here. And I like messages better. But are there things about SubVIs that we can potentially lose? That maybe advantages we had that we weren't very aware of, that we can easily lose when we go to do things with messages. And so that's what I talk about. What would a SubVI do? Right, and so ask yourself that question about messages. So one thing you say, like, this is like a SubVI, this is a SubVI, right? It's send a message. So that is a SubVI. So isn't it kind of the same thing? And I'm going to illustrate this with the sample project, Continuous Measurement and Logging, using the 2015 LabVIEW version. Not because I'm picking on that, although I am. But that's because this is one that everyone will be familiar with. How many people are familiar with continuous measurement and logging? Okay. How many people have built projects from it? As a starting point? So see that. This is the continuous measurement and logging. I haven't really done any modifications, so this is sort of clean. The only modification I did is I changed what happens when there's an error, so I can actually stop it. the error I'm going to cause. So there's an event handling loop, there's a producer consumer. Event handling loop sends messages on a queue, and we have this loop in the middle, which is sort of like the big boy. This is the one that actually has the most logic in it for actually starting and stopping things. And then there's actually an acquisition message logger and a logging message logger. And those are the two things that while running, the acquisition is just getting data and sending it to the logger, which is just logging it. But this UI message loop is sort of in charge. It sort of tells them to start and tells them to stop. And so, let's see. I wish I probably should run it, I guess. So you click on it, nothing happens, and then you hit start. Data starts coming in. Stop. Data stops. Sounds good. You can either exit directly, or if you push the button, it'll ask if you want to exit. And then it stops data collection and exits. It's a very simple app. It's actually quite a good one. It does what you need to do if you're just collecting and logging data. I'm going to look at three things that this does and talk about. One is something called sub-actions on the queue. That is, by action, I mean this thing is told to do something. And I'm talking about the big loop in the middle here. It's told to do something, but that involves it also doing other things. So this involves sending messages to itself. So it's saying, I'm doing this, I need to do these actions as well, so I'll put them on the queue so they happen next. Another thing I'm talking about is how the error handling works in this. The third thing I'm going to talk about is something called system state. That's the state, application state diagram. We've got multiple things talking to each other, but the whole application should have some kind of state diagram. Right? It's idle, it's running, and so on. Right? Basically, it's two states, idle and running. So number one, sub-actions on the queue. This happens only at one place in this the sample project. It's in the initialize case. It queues up initialize UI references, broadcast settings, which sends the initial settings to the two other loops, and then update status, which is just the UI thing. Now, it only happens in this one place, but this is the kind of thing that when you start to build on this, you will have the great temptation to do, because you won't be able to do everything in one case, or you already have another case written that does what you need to do now. So sending messages to yourself will be a common act that you'll be at least tempted to do. Okay, so let's look at the code again and make a change. So say this works fine. You start it, you press start, it starts taking data. Let's say that now you're using this in a more complicated application where it has to be started and start taking data right away. So how are you going to do that? It's quite simple, you just send a message. So when you hit start, it just sends start. So that's very easy to do. We can do that from someone else. We can do that right away. So now we're just going to send start right away rather than pushing the button. You could do a value signaling property node to push the button programmatically. You would do the same thing. So will that work? What will happen?
Messages out of order, it's not initialized.
Exactly. So it'll say TDS open, something about the logging loop complains, throws an error forever. We hit stop. Also, you probably don't quite notice what the UI is wrong. We were clearly running, but it shows the start button as if it stopped. It doesn't show the stop button even though it's clearly running. So it's actually, there's multiple problems. And if you use a probe to try and figure out what happened, I'm using something called the cyclic table probes, which I have on the LabVIEW on the tools network, which lets you, it's basically a history probe. When I start, a couple of errors. Ooh, what happened there? So these are the operations as they came in. One, I got initialized first. This designed only to initialize first. Then I did start. Well, I sent it start. Then I got initialized UI references, which is after I've already hit start. Broadcast settings, which is why I caused the error because you hadn't set the settings yet. Then I done some update statuses and then my errors. And the reason is that these are out of order. In that you can't do anything until you've initialized. You're violating a rule. You've done something when you've only halfway through your initialization procedure. So what would a SubVI do? SubVI, if you call a SubVI, that's an action. SubVIs can contain their own SubVIs, those are like sub-actions. They contain their own sub-actions. And the thing about this is that if you do A then B, A will execute everything before B executes. A does not queue up operations on the back that happen after B. A contains all its sub-actions. It's an all or nothing thing. And you can write down the order of what will happen. Do A, this is the order of all the things as they will be called. And they can only be that way. It doesn't matter anything about timing, it's always this way. And if you look at it and think about it for a while, this is not queue-like execution, it's stack-like execution. Because you start queue up A and B, but A then stacks A1, A2 on top. So they execute before B does. A1 stacks A1A and A1B on top of A2, so it's first. It's a stack, it's an execution stack, not a queue. Also, it's a private stack. Once you've started operating A, no one else can interfere with it. Right? You can't throw things in to interrupt any of these actions. It's all or nothing. This kind of operation is sometimes called run to completion execution. That means you do things in order and you handle one thing completely before handling the next thing. And that's what we're violating in the template, where it's got a queue and it just sort of throws things on the back. So here's another way of looking at it. If you queue up your actions, but the sub-actions are like a stack, then everything executes in order if I do A and B. But if I actually stack up two things, I've done A1 and A2, but if I stack up things and two things happen together, they all interleave. Right? So if you do A and B together, then all the operations will execute in that order. Or if B was slightly delayed relative to A, then it'll be a different order. And a little more of a delay, it'll be a different order. So there are many, 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 many possible orderings. Some of them very unlikely. And that's many places for race conditions to hide. Right? Here, if you test this and it works, well, it works. If you test this and it works, that doesn't mean you're not going to hit, ordering 3 very rarely and cause a bug. Right? So this is very undesirable. And the SubVIs, the way SubVIs do it, also, I'll put a note here because the JKI state machine is something that also has the ability to do it like this, because you can use it in sort of an internal stack fashion so that things actually execute in, what would you call it? Another thing about this is kind of like a protected section, critical section. This code executes all together and can't be interfered with. So this all happens together, this all happens together. Here, it can all intermix, it's not protected. And if you thought of another third party that sends a message, set P means to set a parameter. So some parameter used by these other steps. Set P can only come between 2 of your messages. It can't happen in the middle. Here, set P can happen anywhere. So again, there's many places. It's much more of a burden to say that every single one of these substeps must be okay if any of the message comes in between them. That's a very high burden. Here it's much less. These things, A1A can leave the code in a totally unstable state that can't handle anything else except A1B. But A1B is going to happen next, so that's fine. Over here, A1A must leave the system such that any other message can come next. Okay, now the second of the 3 things I'm going to look at is error handling. In the template, after each case is executed, there's an error handling SubVI. And the thing to note is that the error does not go back in the shift register. So if there's an error, it's got to be handled here completely. And if you look inside, you'll find a note in the code. Code recommended. It's quite long. Its user interface isn't very good. But it basically says, if you have an error, try to handle it here. If you get to here, it's very difficult to handle it because you don't know what state you're in. And it actually says you should probably exit. By default, it actually exits if it gets any error to this point. And it says exceptions to this rule are for experienced programmers and should be reviewed with team members to check for race conditions, which is quite an ominous documentation to put in your template. So what does the SubVI do? SubVI has a very simple error handling strategy. If A1A has an error, and it doesn't know what to do with it. I mean, obviously, if it can fix the error, it does. It passes it to the next thing. A1B has an error in input. The template doesn't. The error is never wrapped around. Every bit of code has no idea if any error has happened before. So A1B, though, knows there's an error, and it has the options. It can do nothing, probably the most common. It can clean up code that it's supposed to clean up, so things like release queue, execute, even if there's an error. So it can clean up code. It can do some kind of alternate functionality if there's an error, if it has to do something. Or it can just pass it through. And it also bubbles up the levels. So these are SubVIs, these are deep operations, low level. They can bubble up to the higher level so that A2 sees there was an error somewhere ahead. And then this structure sees there was an error. And this structure, because it's at the high level, it better knows what to do. So say this operation was user tried to open a file, and then the user picked a file that was the wrong format. That's not a fatal error. At this point in the code, we know we have cleaned up the file reference because the closed file would have executed. We know that opening a file and failing is not a critical thing. We don't have to exit. We can display it to the user as a proper response and then clear the error. We can do that because at the top level, the high level stuff knows what we're trying to do. The low level stuff where the error was doesn't know what it's doing. It just had some error. But it could bubble up the error to the top level, and then it knows what it's doing. So this is actually much more sophisticated than the template is doing. The template is effectively saying, you got an error here, 2 options. Ignore it, clear it, execute all this code as if there was no error, which is probably disastrous. Hit stop your application, which is also not the best thing. The user did not want that when you just want to open a file. Or log it, and I mean, that's the only 2 options. So the SubVIs are much more sophisticated. They have a much better error handling strategy, involving passing it along the chain, passing it up through the levels to someone who actually might know what to do about it. I mean, even this, you think that's unsophisticated, just show it to the user. But this is something you can do if you know this was a user action that started it. This guy can't do that because he doesn't know why he was called. So to summarize what the SubVI tells us about subactions, one is do subactions with SubVIs. Rather than call stuff yourself, you can actually do SubVIs, and then you get all the benefits of SubVIs. But if you're not going to do that, and I don't do that, you should do your subactions like SubVIs. Think about the advantages they have. They execute in basically a private stack. So once you start executing something, all its options execute before the next one. This is called run to completion. It does error chaining, which is actually a simple but effective strategy for handling errors. And you want to be able to do some error handling at the action level. So user selected open file. There was a problem. Handle the error caused by the user selecting open file. Because that's the point where you know, is this a fatal error or not? Not right down someone tried to read a string and they didn't get the right character. Because deep down there, you have no option but clear it or exit. Okay, now I'm going to go to the third point. The third point is a little wider. The third point is about interacting loops rather than just one. The first 2 points are about one loop, one message handling loop. So this is the state. This is the state diagram of this application. That's how I've done it. You initialize. You're in the idle state. You start. You acquire and log. You stop. You go to idle. You can exit from either case. If you exit when acquiring, you stop first. Right. That's what it's doing, right? So let's go have a look at the actual system state versus the actual state that's in the program. I won't bother going over again, but I mean, basically the state diagram I showed you is the state diagram of the program. But if you look at the actual thing that is state in the program, this UI message loop, those are the states. Now I can recognize idle. I can recognize acquiring and logging. What the hell is waiting for exit, acquire, acquisition, stop, waiting for exit, log, stop, waiting for stop, acquisition, stop, waiting for stop, log, stopped. Right, so what is all that about? What states were those? I didn't see those when I was using the program. If you diagram that, that's the state diagram of the program. Right? And then all the reason this is for is that if you want to stop and exit, you got to tell 2 loops to stop. They take time. They have to tell you they're stopped before you exit. So you tell stop and exit, and you got to wait for someone to say something. And if acquisition says I'm stopped, then you wait for log to stop. And if log stops, then you wait for acquisition to stop. And then because you're waiting for exit, you exit. Or if you're just waiting to stop, then you go idle. Right, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 states. Now there's two problems with this. One, this is a very simple case. You're stopping two things, and you're doing one of two things. If you were stopping 5 things, and you had one of 4 things you wanted to do after that, this would explode, right? And if you want to change it, so you wanted to say acquisition to stop first, and then log stop, you'd have a big refactoring job because you'd have to go through all this state stuff and redo it. Right, so this is not scalable or refactorable very well at all.
Which is amusing because that's actually why it was redesigned.
Yeah. The other problem is that these are states. You can receive a message. The user can click a button and by chance hit it in one of these states. And because you're in the middle of changing the system state, acquiring logging is the system state. Idle is a system state. You are in some kind of weird nether region. If you have another message come in, it might fail. It's got a race condition. Now, with the template as it is, you can't do that because it's very simple. There's only so many buttons the user can push. The user can't push that fast. Right? The user can't push fast enough to cause a problem. Right? But if you were to extend this and have more programmatic stuff going on, you could easily get a case where you have a very rare error where some message comes in right here, causes a bug. So anyway, this is sort of a diagram. I'm talking about a system state transition. This is, we were running, now we are transitioning to idle. But that's a multi-step process where messages got to fly around. I've got to say stop, stop, I've got to wait for these 2 to come back. So what would a SubVI do? I've already showed you, because a SubVI would do it exactly like I showed you in the first diagram. That's because when a SubVI stops, you want to stop 2 things. Do you like them? I put it in there. You want to plan last minute.
Just pandering to the audience.
No, it's good though, but I mean, this is code. Programs are actually coded this way. You stop, and you wait for both of them to stop. There's my state. I tell 2 things to stop. And if that happens first, then I'm waiting for this one. And if this happens first, I'm waiting for that one. And stop. That's all your transitional state. It's very, very simple. If you want to change this and you want to stop acquisition and then logging, what do you do? Tap, put it there, cut those things, chain through the error wires, done. Right? This is much more scalable. You could do 10 things, 20 things this way. Much more scalable, much more refactorable. And there's no way for a message to interfere with this. This will execute regardless of what the user pushes.
I still dispute the fact that model you showed was a state diagram.
Yes, technically.
It's a transition diagram.
Technically, yes. Well, it isn't because something else could happen here and that does weird stuff. So this is the other one, the new one, is an actual state diagram because that is actually what the state system would be if you wrote it this way.
Doing an action.
Now, what I realized about SubVIs is they are equivalent to a synchronous request reply. SubVI call is basically send a message to the SubVI, wait for it to get back to you, and then it gives you a reply, which are the outputs. So you can mimic this in a messaging system by using synchronous request reply, where you have a SubVI. You have to change how the messaging works. You got to give it a reply address. This basically creates a temporary address, attaches it to the message, says reply to me here, waits for the reply to come back, and then continues. So this will execute exactly the same as the SubVI one, right? Because it will send the message and wait for a reply. Now, I'm relying being at a CLA summit with people in the audience, Stephen Merchant maybe. What is the problem with this?
What if you never get a reply?
Okay, well, there's a timer on it. It's a better problem. Because your SubVI could never come back, right? You call a SubVI, and it gets an infinite loop, and never replies. So that's not different than a SubVI. This is advised against in the active framework, for example.
If there's a whole stack of things in the message queue already, and you're not saying that you're going to process that next, you're going to process that when the messaging queue gets around to it. So you could be stalled out of dealing with that, the stopping case.
Okay, but that was true before, because you told it to stop and you were waiting. You were asynchronously waiting. All right.
If you use my Q actually.
Deadlock. Deadlock is loop A has sent a message to B and it's waiting for B to come back. As part of that, loop B has sent a message to loop A and is waiting for it to come back. Everyone's waiting until somebody times out. You're deadlocked. Nothing's happening. Okay, so that's critical flaw in doing synchronous send message and wait for reply stuff. Now, what would a SubVI do? Okay, so SubVI A is called SubVI B. CMVI B calls SubVI A. There's a deadlock. Why doesn't that come up? Why are you frowning at that?
If they're not re-entering, it won't come up.
Re-entry is not the same thing. Re-entry is calling a clone of the original.
Yeah.
So that's not the same.
Cannot enter the same.
So
It can't start.
So why don't we have a problem with this all the time?
One has to run the page.
The problem is this is a re-entrant call and a non-re-entrant VI. And the compiler will break your code if you try to do this. But do you spend all day trying to fix your code because it's broken because of this? How often does it come up when you're coding?
No, we can't physically do it, but you can't drop B into A or put A into B. No, do one on top.
Recursive, not.
Even recursively,
The reason it doesn't come
itself
up
into itself.
The reason it doesn't come up is that you normally don't have any circular call dependencies. Your code calls drivers, and drivers might call low-level code, but you have a hierarchy, right? Your main VI calls sub-VI. Sub-VIs don't call the main VI. Sub-VIs call lower-level VIs. The lower levels don't call the upper-level VI. That's what the levels mean. Right? There's a call hierarchy of who calls who, and there's no circular call dependencies. So what I do myself and recommend doing is that when you are changing the system, think about the system state. When you're changing it, you need to do that synchronously. And you can do it synchronously because you have a call hierarchy in your loops. And the actual, the template actually does this already because the template has a UI message loop. This sends commands to these loops. These loops never send commands to the UI loop. They send notifications. They send information, I have done this. But they never send anything that they need responded to. These do not require the UI loop to exist when they're running. Right? The UI loop is handling no messages, it's just sitting there. The UI loop requires these guys to respond to it. So the UI loop is calling these loops, but these loops don't have to call this loop because there's a level, right? This is a higher level, lower level. And it's just like sub-VIs, where if you have your VIs calling sub-VIs, they don't call you. Right? They don't refer to you. And this is kind of the hardest, but most important point, is that if you're doing with loops, I've seen it where people have like, well, this loop can send that to that, and this loop sends this, blah, 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 blah. But if everyone is calling on everyone else, it's both very confusing, highly coupled, and you can lead into all sorts of problems where something is waiting. It's not just waiting for a reply. If I tell you to do something, and I need it to be done, then I am dependent on you doing something. So I'm still waiting. The other loop, when it sends messages, even though it was asynchronous, it was still waiting, right? It's still dependent on these guys doing something. So it's still a call dependency, even if you didn't do it synchronous. So the way you treat this kind, and by doing a call dependency, where this guy can stop and actually synchronously do stuff, he can do it simply like a sub-VI, and he can implement the exact state diagram that you want. So this guy becomes the application. This guy implements the exact, simple, easy to modify state diagram. And these guys are callees, they're used by this guy. So it's probably the hardest point, but also the most important point, I think. Anything else? Oh, I'm possibly this. I actually modified continuous measurement and logging to actually fix all these when I see the problems. Continuous measurement logging. So this is the exact same thing where I've modified it. And the first thing about this is that it starts right away. And that is because I've actually modified this. Looks a bit uglier, but you can make it easier. I kind of hacked it in where it's got an action queue, a sub-action queue. This is designed so that when you stack an action on it, that action takes priority over anything outside. So this action queue will queue up the next action. And if there's no more actions, then it goes no more sub-actions, next message, then it gets a message up the message queue. So it does run to completion where each message is handled completely before the next one. The other thing about it is that the error wire now has a shift register. It wraps around. This VI, if there's another action, will call up that action and pass the error through. It won't clear it or do anything different. That's so that each action can see there's an error upstream. This becomes the error input. So it knows an error has happened. Only if there's no more actions does it look at the error. And if there's an error, it calls no more sub-actions, error handling. So the error handling always goes on the end. So if you've done a bunch of actions and something has opened a file, close the file, and you have an error, you know the file's been closed. Because you've gone through all the code and you've cleaned up all your resources. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is I added, in the stop case, one is I've eliminated all those, oops. I have eliminated all those extra waiting states. There's just two states now, idle and acquiring a login. And I have changed it so that I've made it so that there's now it's got request reply. You can actually get a reply. And so this is send message and wait for a reply. So I send stop to the two things. I wait for them all to be done. And then either I call next, they either call just go idle, or I call exit. So for example, the confirm quit now calls, if you say confirm quit and you just stop and exit. Right. So it becomes easy, much easier. So it's just, if you want to quit, just say stop and exit. And that executes the code and exits without all these little waiting states. So it does the same thing, but it's now, if you add to this, it doesn't, from the examples is they always do simple things, and it's all working. Problem is when you start adding things, that it will show up. This, I would say, is much more robust against you adding things, because things are separated, you run to completion, you follow through all the errors, you're better to handle an actual error when it comes up, and this guy is actually doing the state of the whole application. And that's it.
Look, quick look at the action cases.
These things?
So that still hasn't got a timeout loop, it still needs something to happen on the VI. Where does it wait?
It waits actually these actual VIs. So when you call it stop, these things will actually send a message and they will wait themselves for the message to come back.
Yeah, well, okay, the one where you've got no action.
No action.
That's the main waiting one.
Oh, that one. That's it. If you got no more action, it'll wait for a message. Here's the infinite timeout. Just waiting for a message. All external input comes in through here.
Oh, and it can't come from anywhere.
So the thing is, this stack, there's nothing coming in here. This generates itself on first call, deliberately, so you can't branch this out. This is deliberately made. I've seen people have perfectly good templates and they wreck it by saying, "Oh, I need to have this over here." So don't do that. So this actually, you can't get this queue. It's really a queue. You're stacking in front. You can't get it out of this loop. It's private to this loop, so it can't be interfered with. It executes like a SubVI. Once you call a SubVI, it does its stuff. You can't interfere, unless, of course, you put things, external things into it. I probably can do the.
At any point did you try doing it with a single queue so that maybe you protected or dealt with the on-queuing of multiple events or multiple states like an atomic operation? So maybe some kind of semaphoring or something to prevent other queue elements being inserted in the middle.
It's difficult to do. If you have a single queue and you say, this loop can stack stuff on the front, no one else can do anything but stuff on the back, then it works, because you're using it as a stack and a queue. Problem is, you can't really enforce that. Someone else can put it on the front. There's no way to enforce that. With a private stack internally, you can't enforce it. There's no way to get at it.
You can wrap a queue in a class and make it private, and only provide an API for on queuing.
Yeah, the thing is, someone can always branch it somewhere else.
That could run on a real time system. Well,
So first of all, there's no sub-action, so it gets the message, it's initialized. It executes initialized rest, broadcast settings, update status. Then it's got nowhere sub-action, next message, start, nowhere sub-action, next message, confirm, quick, stop, update. So it's, you can sort of see where it gets the next message. And each message is executed completely before the next one can happen. And again, you don't see it because this is so quick, and the only input is the user. The user can't push buttons fast enough to break this. But once you start programmatically doing something, I can easily do it fast enough to hit two messages really quickly.
So would you say that for this application, that using messages is a valid architecture?
I think you need to be able to have mixed the synchronous request reply, which is when you are changing things, because you're changing the whole setup of the system, going from logging to idle is a multi-step process. Trying to do that all asynchronously is very problematic. Doing it synchronously is easy. But then when you're actually in the steady state of acquiring and logging, that's all asynchronous messages. So you want to mix both.
So it's a valid architecture, it just wasn't very well implemented.
Well, it needs more. It needs to think about it needs request reply, a way to work synchronously. And to think about the hierarchy. Because it's almost there. It's got a loop that's in charge. And it's got two secondary loops that are doing their thing by themselves. And the loop in charge sends them commands. And they never send commands to the loop. So it's actually very close. But it needs a way to go a little further and actually do things synchronously.
The reason for asking is, as soon as I see somebody saying, I need to make this behave more like a different architecture or a different implementation, you start opening up for well, shouldn't I have just done it in that other way in the first place to solve that problem, rather than trying to band-aid or simulate or emulate behavior?
I would recommend against using the key message handler that AI puts out. I think the JKI state machine is much better as a well-established template that's out there.
I just think people try to use a message handler as a state machine. It's like using a banana as an airship. They're different things for different things. So I just don't see why you would use one for another.
The thing I'm trying to get for is that the thing ties together is when you switch from SubVIs to messages, you weren't aware of some of the benefits of the SubVIs. And when you design your messaging, you drop it, you lose it. You don't realize what you've lost. And if you realize it, you can design your messaging system to actually have those benefits as well. But you got to be aware of what you've just given up by switching from SubVIs.
Yeah, that's a good point, really, because I've been thinking about sort of asynchronous things recently. My tagline seems to be giving you all the benefits of distributed systems in a system that isn't distributed. And being our user, I'm writing a lot of distributed systems at the moment. I'm really failing to see why would we want so much asynchronicity in our code, because there is a huge pain.
In my applications, in the application I showed before, the startup, the shutdown, and the changing things is a lot of steps. That's all synchronous. Right? The top level loop is actually doing things and waiting for them to happen and doing the next step and waiting for it to happen. So good 80% of the coding is synchronous.
Yeah.
But then in the actual steady state going, data flowing through, that's all asynchronous. Well, no one's waiting.
Well, that's probably my thoughts on it is, when I make a completely asynchronous system, well, it's not a large percentage of the system needs to be asynchronous.
But as soon as it needs a bit of asynchronous, you have to start from an asynchronous base.
But synchronous request reply is.
So just because you need a bit of asynchronous, you're going to make your entire architecture asynchronous?
Because that allows you to force synchronous later.
starting from synchronous, you can't force asynchronous on top.
No, the thing I use, which is called Messenger Library, also on the Tools Network, it's all asynchronous, but there's the ability to use it synchronously on top.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you start from I need a little bit of this, you have to start with an architecture that encompasses that, and then force the rest of it, because you can do it that way around. If you start with a system which is full flat SubVI, if you like, where everything is completely synchronous, it's very difficult to then add a small amount of asynchronous.
I'll let Steve argue that.
So when was the last time anyone in the room had a long, straight SubVI? That's pretty much the thing that changes you from this is my first program to this is my second program, is you break data flow and you run it all through some messaging system, be it events, queues, whatever.
That's a big right.
But you don't destroy what you've got to get to some halcyon sort of ground where everything is perfect. You know, the perfect ground is the simple stuff you do simply, and the difficult stuff you do difficult. You know, as difficult as it is, you don't make everything difficult just because you're doing one difficult thing.
Can I just show you
Which is kind of what I think we're doing at the moment.
This is my standard building block. So the application I showed before is built entirely out of this. Is basically the only building block. It's the template that starts. It's a message handling loop. So the outer loop is something has happened, and there's an event structure. And the events are either front panel events or there's a message received event, and that has standard messages that come in. And when you have things that want to happen later, sub-actions, you use a JKI style where you just write the things you want to happen next. And here is another loop which executes all the sub-actions, another case structure. And then it's set up so that the empty case, which is the last thing it executes, does error handling and also replies to if it was a message, you got the replies to it. So this is a message handler that does run to completion, has the error wire go all the way through to the end, so error handling is at the end. And you can use it in building blocks in a messaging system that has request reply, so you can do synchronous request reply. So all the things I'm talking about, I've kind of built into the thing that I actually use. So it's not theoretical, it's actual applications.
And that module exposes its public API through user events.
Well, it exposes it through the messengers, which is a messenger library, one of which is a user event. So this is a user event that carries messages rather than lots of different user events. How long is that?
Oh, I can tell you.
All right.
I can tell you precisely.
This is that giving me.
It's about half an hour.
All right, that's it.
Yeah, that's what we start.
I think it's not good.
Yeah. You got 45 minutes.
40 minutes. But you're supposed to leave
you got at least 10 minutes of Mercer questions. Which I will answer himself.
So I'm actually trying to be controversial because this is what you're not supposed to do. The active framework is actually very different. In the active framework, you're only supposed to send messages to your caller. And that means that you depend on your caller because it's the only thing listened to. So your caller can't go off and do synchronous stuff because then it suddenly cuts off communication with the outside world. So the active framework, as you're supposed to use it, violates this rule completely. So I'm hoping to provoke some discussion.
It's kind of interesting. A lot of this conversation is kind of interesting on a larger level, because I'll let you guys all fight it out. Where eventually you come up with something I like, then it's distributed systems that I'm interested in, and you can apply it all to all the messaging type protocols and the rules of your dealing out.
There's a website called that's a website of messaging patterns, which is used in kind of distributed multi-computer business. You're passing orders back and forth.
And that's the end game for me. Is getting something we do UGP echoing system. It works fine.
But a lot of the messaging patterns that in Messenger Library, I try to put in all these messaging patterns so you can use them. It comes from there's this website that actually describes a lot of the messaging patterns, which is actually
You can dig it out of your head, mate. You stick a link on the user group. It'll be interesting.
You said the Act somewhat promotes the idea of deadlock.
It doesn't promote. It says, well,
It says don't design your system
Says don't
so
do it.
that you can't go at the same level where.
yeah, the actor framework. In this example, for example, the data is passed directly from acquisition to logging. In the actor framework, that would be passed up to the caller and down to logging. So that means if the caller suddenly goes off into some other world doing stuff synchronously, waiting for something, then all of a sudden your data isn't going through. So you depend, acquisition and logging depend on the caller as a router to route stuff through. Depends on it. It's using the caller. Because they use each other, there's a possibility of deadlock. If you use synchronous messages in a system where two people can send synchronous messages to each other, there's a possibility of deadlock. SubVIs never do that. SubVIs never call their caller. So it's
Excellent. I like it where you've written that. I don't like the title you've given me. Message UI loop.
that's their title.
Is
I would call that. I would call that top level or main
Well, it's
control
stateful
main.
as well. It's got state stuff in it and all sorts.
Really, you could call that application.
Yeah.
Main.
Yeah. Because we use, we have a loop that just does UI stuff, and that's what we call it. It doesn't do anything.
Enterprise integration patterns.
I won't do my code with you unless you really want to. I think time is moving on.
How are we going to register for the next one then?
Right, hopefully you've all signed in on a piece of paper on the desk. What I'll do, if I'm allowed to, because of data protection, I'll put a list on the website of who attended. But if I can't do that, we'll make sure that it gets back to the speaker. In some fashion. I mean, if it is just a matter of saying,
I'm just thinking that they ain't going to clue which of my profiles that's going to go to. Not fine.
Multiple pros, spamming. You're the reason I went into migration.
It's called enterprise integration patterns.
Okay.
And there's a whole bunch of messaging patterns. There's an example called scatter gather. That's where you ask multiple things for information and you wait until you get all the responses before you do anything. And that's something that I've implemented. I use that in the application I showed because I got many things running.
Yeah.
And I got to ask him what information. I got to get information from all of them. So that's scatter gather.
Yeah.
Yes, well, I probably need to. So, it all works fine, but it's all, what I'm dreaming up at the moment. Having any rigor behind it. Marvellous. Well, the next one is, I don't know when, probably 3 months.
In the meantime, shameless plug for LabVIEW Developer Days.
Oh, I just got the email for that. When was this?
14th April. The agendas, you will have got an email today, I'm sure.
The agenda link takes you to the registration link.
Yeah. There's another link from that.
Oh, is there?
The agenda's on the registration page, isn't it?
No, there's another link. I've got 2 links there.
Is it interesting?
I will.
Don't forget, that probably links to the terms and conditions.
Oh, is there? And then that takes
The developer days, what is
It's a talent link on the main list. It's an asynchronous registration. You send the message.
The agenda, I'm trying to think of some more advanced topics.
It's what happens when you use June.
Yeah, so there's a kind of slightly more basic one, although there's some.
I could,
I guess. We are embedded applications, Act framework.
How did you get on with your source code control?
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me about it. Yeah.
Okay.
We are the
Sure, Payne.
country.
Oh, no, it's not.
And so we have to, like, corporate has to
Someone say.
Oh, Samuel, yeah, the one from Pete, did you No, I do. I need to learn some of the
Yeah, no, we in the
All good stuff, working hard this time. Working hard.